Game of Thrones, the scheming Baratheon. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction. So please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter. And if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 126, Edward's Plans for Jon Snow. After waiting for half an hour with Clint and Howland Reed, Edward got to see Ned, whose eyes were still red. Although Ned was a tough man, no one could hold his tears after seeing his beloved sister die like that. Although she did not get technically raped by Rhaegar, in Ned's eyes, what Rhaegar did was no different. To force the woman who loved her family the most to marry him was not acceptable for Ned. If Rhaegar did not die under Edward's sword in the Trident, Edward wished he would behead the man himself. If Ned had been someone who behaved like Robert and did not value his honor, he would have killed the other children of the Targaryen wonder good, said Edward, trying to see how his friend was feeling after all this. He could wait for Ned if Ned still needed some more time. He was the one who had caused most of this man's tragedy after all, and this was the last thing that he could do for him. Ned did not reply and just nodded his head to tell Edward that he did not need to care about it. There were much more important things than his feelings at the moment. "I am grateful for your help, Edward." "Thank you," said the Honorable Eddard Stark, while bowing his head. He had seen with his eyes how much Edward had helped him and his family because of their friendship. Not only did Edward help him with his sword training since the old days in the Eyrie, but Edward took care of the North because of the friendship between the two. He even came here to this desolate place with him to rescue Lyanna when Robert was the one who was supposed to be here with him. Ned did not know why he formed him more closer to Robert instead of Edward. If he did, things might have been a lot different. "Don't worry about it, Ned. We are friends, are not we? Plus, I did this for Lyanna, not for you," said Edward as he helped Ned up, then punched him in his shoulder, trying to lighten the mood a little. Edward did not even get embarrassed after getting the gratitude of Ned when he was the biggest reason for something like that to happen. Ned smiled a little after Edward's try of joking. He knew that Edward was saying that to him so that Ned would not feel burdened. Ned swore in his heart to pay Edward's favors in the future. Whatever that Edward required from the North, Ned would do whatever he could to help him. "What about the boy? Have you thought of something?" asked Edward as he looked at the little Jon. "It is finally the time to start changing things, isn't it?" thought Edward to himself as he looked at Jon, the supposed promised prince from the prophecy. The reason why Rhaegar got this mad and followed his father's path. The son of fire and ice was in front of him. Edward wondered what would happen if he killed Jon right at the moment. Would the Lord of Light come down to kill Edward himself? Edward's mind started formulating different plans in order to put Jon and the Lord of Light to their best use. Edward did not want Jon to live in the North and then go to the Wall. Edward wanted to be the one who had complete control over Jon's fate. But everything would depend on Ned Stark's choice at the moment. Edward needed to ask Ned to let Jon follow him to Storm's End, where he would raise him with his other children, but he knew that Ned would refuse since he had just promised his sister to take care of the young Jon. "I will take him with me to Winterfell. I will raise him as my son," said Ned as he looked at the little child in his arms. He looked at the child's eyes with a complicated look. If it was not for his honor and his sister, he would have killed the offspring of that madman Rhaegar. "You will raise him as your bastard?" asked Edward, faking his surprise. It was as if he was telling Ned, "How dare you think of doing something like that to your sister's child? What else could I do? I have to do this to protect him from Robert," said Ned as he looked at Edward after saying that. He needed Edward's support to put up with such a plan. Although Robert was his friend, Ned knew that if he heard that Jon was the child of both Lyanna and Rhaegar, Robert would kill the child without a second thought. Well, it was clear that any Lord of Westeros would do the same if they found about this situation, especially the Lannister. "How would you deal with your Tully's wife then? Would not she bully the poor child because he was your bastard? How would you answer your sister, then?" asked Edward, making it difficult for Ned. He knew whatever he did, Ned would not allow him to take Jon to Storm's End at the moment. Edward just had to show him that he was making things difficult for Lyanna's child by taking him to Winterfell so that Edward could take him back in the future. "What else could I do? It is a difficult situation already," said Ned after thinking about the whole situation. He would already forsake his honor in order to protect his sister. He could only persuade Catelyn to treat the child well. I could take and raise the boy myself in Storm's End if you like. I think I have a chance to persuade Asherah to take him in and raise him as one of our children instead," said Edward as he tried to put the idea in Ned's head so that he could do that in the future. "I prefer to raise him myself. I made my promise to Lyanna," said Ned as he turned to look at the child in his hand. "All right, but I will visit the north everyone once in a while to check on the boy. If I see that you are neglecting him, I will take him with me to Stormsland," said Edward as he nodded his head to Ned. He then took an ink and paper from a bag on his horse and started writing a letter. After hearing Edward's word, a weird expression appeared on Ned's face. He did not know why Edward cared this much about the boy. But after some thinking, Ned assumed that Edward did so for his friendship with him and Lyanna. Ned was not the best thinker in Westeros and could not figure what was in Edward's mind. In fact, Edward would use this simplicity of Ned to take control of the north a little by little. "What are you doing?" asked Ned when he saw Edward took a raven and tied the letter he just strode on the raven's leg. He was afraid that Edward might reveal something about the boy without knowing in the letter. "Don't worry, Ned. We need a carriage to take your sister's body, don't we? Plus, we have to wait some time here so that your story would look more convincing," said Edward as he looked at Ned as if he was an idiot. Was Ned expecting Edward to let Lyanna's body there without taking her with him? Edward had caused enough problem to the girl, so he would not mistreat her dead body as well. Chapter 127, Taking Arthur to Storm's End. Plus, Ned had married the Tully girl nearly 7 months ago, so how did he think he could explain to everyone about his newborn bastard son? He had to at least wait 2 months without returning so that he could look more convincing. Edward planned to have Ned stay in Storm's End after they arrived there so that the plan could work. In the original story, Ned and Jon married at the very start of the rebellion. But due to Edward's achievements in Stormsland and the Reach, the marriage got delayed time and time again as they went for it slowly this time. After thinking about what Edward said, Ned found that Edward's words made sense and started to think of how idiot he was. He also respected Edward for helping him take his sister's body with him. He had planned to wait here for the moment while sending Howland to get a carriage from the nearest town to the tower. Actually, Edward did not want to wait long for this place, so he decided to ask his men staying in Kingsgrave to send him a carriage. He preferred to move their conversation to Storm's End. He spent the rest of the time discussing some matters with the 4 of them. 2 hours later, a few soldiers, holding the Baratheon's banner, came close to the tower with a carriage pulled by 2 horses. After bowing their heads to their lord and handing the carriage to Clegane, Edward ordered them to return to their posts. Edward and Ned then climbed the tower back to the room where Lyanna's body was. Edward let Ned and the maids change Lyanna's dress that got covered with her blood. The maids chose a white dress which made Lyanna look like a sleeping angel with a pale and tired face. Edward then helped Ned carry her body after covering her, and both of them went down. After helping Ned putting Lyanna's body on the carriage, they decided to let Howland drive the carriage while Arthur Dayne would take his horse while still being tied by the robe. Edward decided to move slowly on their way to Storm's End. He wanted to waste as much time as he could so that Ned's story could look more convincing to the others. Of course, the 3 of them would get questioned by others. If the Honorable Ned Stark could do something like that to dishonor himself, what about Lord Baratheon, who was known for doing something like that before his marriage? But Edward did not care about anyone's opinions. He would be the Storm King very soon. It took them 2 weeks to arrive at Storm's End this time. Edward did not wait and prepared a ship under some of his trusted men. They would be responsible for taking Lyanna to the north, White Harbor, to be exact. Edward asked Ned to write a letter to Ben to receive the ship and take care of his sister until the moment when Ned returned to the north, where they would hold her funeral. Edward did not forget to ask Ned to keep something from Lyanna in order to show it to Robert when Ned returned to King's Landing. After this, Edward prepared a place for Ned where the man could hide with a little child in his hands and prepared some maids to take care of the child in Ned's place. He then took the still in the daze and self-blame Arthur Dayne to the castle's dungeon. If Robert knew about this, he would get angry, but Edward did not really care anymore. Edward then went to his room. He wanted to check on Asherah and the children for after entering the room, he saw Asherah, who got much better from the last time that Edward saw her. Edward got a little surprised as he did not expect his words to be this effective, that Asherah would change this much. He thought that she would still be grieving for her dead sister, but it seemed that he had underestimated the loss of her sister. "I see that you are much better now, Ash. said Edward as he sneaked on Ashura. He did not knock on the door this time, and Ashura was playing with Axel and did not notice him. Ashura, who got a little surprised by Edward's voice since no one had informed her of his return, stood up at once and came close to him before hugging him. "You are back, my love. How did it go?" asked Ashura, but she did not raise her head to look at Edward. She did not want to face him if he said that her brother died as well. "Don't worry. Your idiotic brother is in the castle's dungeon. But Lyanna Stark died when we arrived," said Edward as he faked a sad tone at the end of his sentence. Lyanna and Ashura got really close in the last few years, especially when Lyanna visited Ashura in Storm's End after Raymond was born. "What?" Ashura got surprised a little by what Edward said. She felt a little guilty here since all she cared about the last time they talked was her brother. Ashura did not even ask Edward to take of Lyanna. At the moment, she lost all her close friends. After Elia and Lyanna died, she did not have anyone she could describe as her close friend. Plus, after the Danes betrayed Edward's trust and sent a part of their men to help Rhaegar, Edward would never forgive them and might not allow her to see them again. "It is sad, but I did all I could. Sit down. I want to tell you a secret that must never leave this room. Actually, when we arrived, Lyanna had given birth to Rhaegar's child. That cunt threatened her with her family in order to sleep with her. But she died after giving birth to a child," said Edward, trying to describe the situation to hear. He did so because she would figure out this without his help when she saw Ned. He could only conceal the matter regarding his marriage to Lyanna. "What? That asshole did that. How could he betray Elia and force Lyanna?" said Ashura with an angry tone. The problem was that Edward betrayed her friend and forced the other. The one who helped him to do that was none other than her brother. That meant that her brother was one of the living reasons responsible for her sister and two friends' deaths. Ashura swore in her heart to torture him well enough with her hands because of all this. Of course, her heart did not reach the degree where she would decide to take her brother's life yet too. "Where is my brother? I will kill him myself," asked Ashura with anger in her voice. Ashura did not believe that all this could happen in less than 2 years. Chapter 128, Fears of Betrayal. A little review about the timeline. I changed the year Queen Rhaela got pregnant from year 283 to the end of year 282 AC. The tourney of Harrenhal happened at the end of year 281 AC. Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna in the next month. Brandon Stark died a month later at the start of year 282 AC, starting the rebellion after another 2 weeks of his death. The war in Storm's Land and the Reach took Edward nearly 3 months to finish. The Battle of the Gate happened at the start of the 5th month of year 282 AC. The Battle of Holdfast between the Northern and Vale armies and the Crown's army took place 1 month later. Edward captured Jon 1 week later. The marriage of Ned and Jon to the Tully girls happened around the 6th month of year 282 AC. Both sides did not attack each other for nearly 3 months in order to prepare for the final battle. The Battle of the Trident took place at the end of year 282 AC. The sack of King's Landing happened at the start of the year 283 AC when Aerys sent the pregnant queen to Dragonstone. Another month later, Ned and Edward found the dying Lyanna. It seemed that Lyanna only carried a child after 4 or 5 months of her kidnapping. After another 2 weeks, they returned to Storm's End. They should be around the 3rd month of year 283 AC, and Ned's first child, Robb, was about to be born. "I imprisoned your brother in the dungeon. It seemed that he did not know about Illyria's death. Let's leave him there for now," said Edward, trying to calm down Ashura. After listening to Edward's advice, Ashura saw no reason for her to meet Arthur for the time being. She would have much time in the future to punish him for everything he did that caused their sister to die. After nodding her head, she turned her eyes to Edward. It was finally the time for them to discuss what she had decided upon by herself. She had already formulated a plan in her mind that would help her achieve everything that she wanted. "Ed, I need you to train me. I mean it, and this time seriously," said Ashura as she looked at Edward with eyes full of determination. She would not accept a no for an answer. She had to get strong enough in order to protect everything precious in her heart. Edward looked at Ashura's eyes and was surprised a little. He did not know that his words and actions would be this effective against Ashura and would change Ashura this much. But Edward had prepared himself for something like this. He did not want his wife to be a weakling that could not protect herself if things went south, so he welcomed this idea and smiled at her. I will do what you want," said Edward as he smiled at Ashura. That was a positive change in his eyes, so of course, he would allow that. In fact, he had an idea that he planned to do, and Ashura would benefit from it but in the future. Ashura's safety was a top priority for him and his children, so her plan actually suited him more than her. Ashura was satisfied by Edward's reply and looked at him in the eyes, intending to tell him the rest of her requests. She did not know if he would agree, but she would insist. Even if Edward refused, Ashura did not mind executing her plans in secret without Edward's knowledge. I also want to build my own guards. I am going to be the queen, and I need my own guards, said Ashura as she looked at Edward. In her thoughts, this was Ashura's first step in order to build her own power in this world. She would not forget to have her secret forces to help her in secret as well. They could kidnap or kill her enemies that might threaten her family in her eyes. No one knew how things would end up, so it was better for her to prepare herself for something like that. Edward looked at Ashura's eyes after hearing her words and became a little worried. Edward always wanted to have full control and did not like any variable to miss his plan. So although he loved Ashura, he was afraid that something might change in the future or she would know about what he did and use this to turn against him. He had seen many powerful bitches that wanted to claim the thrones like Cersei and Daenerys. If Ashura changed more and became like them, she might turn against him in the end and cause him many problems. Why do you want them? Are not my people enough? Asked Edward with some worry that he had hidden well enough so that Ashura could not sense it. As I told yours, Ed, I prefer to have my own guards. What if the men you have chosen betrayed you and killed our children? I can't accept that, said Ashura with determination. She had to prepare for the worst. And at the moment, she did not trust anyone except Edward and her children. In her eyes, she thought everyone had a chance to betray her, and she would not trust anyone except the ones she would choose herself. She did not know that the probability of spies getting into her guards was higher than any of Edward's men betraying her. Edward decided to give in to her command, as she had just shown some improvement after her sister's death. But Edward would always monitor Ashura's actions from this moment forward. He would have to ask agents from Shadow Legion to follow her every move. No one knew that Edward had this organization in his hand, even Ashura. Even the mighty Tywin and the intelligent Varys only thought Edward might have planted some spies in every house like the way they did. They did not realize the difference between what Edward was doing and their petty tricks. Edward was building the first underground organization in the Game of Thrones. Too fine, I will allow you to do that after the coronation ceremonies. Anything else? Asked Edward with some annoyance as he did not like it when things got a little out of his control. He started to think of what he would do if Ashura did some things that would harm him. Could he hurt her? Edward wondered about an answer to this question for a long time after this conversation. I want to torture the dogs that raped my sister by my hands, said Ashura with anger in her voice. She had sworn to flay their skin by her hands for doing something like that to her sister. She had enough determination to do that with her own hands. Edward did not see any reason to refuse her this time. Although it would be weird to know that his wife and mother of his children would do something like that, it was acceptable knowing what those two did to her sister. So Edward nodded his head with a more serious expression. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 129, Talk with Lady Olenna. Edward did not know that his decision this time would turn Ashura into a cold-blooded woman in the future. Of course, it would be some time in the future before she shut herself completely. During the torture, Ashura would find out how much she liked to do something like that. How the screams of her enemies when she flayed their skins were a piece of music in her ears. The legend of the devilish woman would start from here. 3 months passed by in a blink of an eye after Edward's conversation with Ashura. It was finally the time for Robert's coronation in King's Landing. After their fight last time in King's Landing, Edward decided not to attend. He also ordered the other lords of Storm's Land not to attend the ceremonies. He was not acting petty or something. It was just that it would be weird if they went to the coronation and did not kneel in front of Robert. Because if they did something like that, Edward did not mind kicking them out of Storm's Land or even killing them. He would not accept those under him to do something like that. Only Cassandra went to King's Landing to witness the event. Even Stannis did not even think of going there. He could kneel in front of Edward, but he would never do that in front of Robert. 6 As for Stannis, he had completed the task that Edward asked him to do. He managed to persuade the Citadel to give him a copy of half of the books stored there. Well, he did not. In fact, Stannis almost fucked everything up, especially after Lord Arryn sent a raven to Edward asking him to lift the siege on Highgarden and release Mace Tyrell and Randyll Tarly. But thanks to the men that Edward sent to help Stannis in these negotiations, they managed to trade Mace Tyrell, Randyll Tarly, and another 5,000 captured men for copies of the half-books in the Citadel. Lady Olenna Redwyne came herself to find Edward in order to save her son. She also wanted to discuss some terms with Edward, who take a third of the Reach. Everyone had heard about Edward's deal with Robert and Jon before the coronation. When Lady Olenna heard everything, she knew that they could not face the powerful armies of Stormsland or the anger of the Crown, especially after all the soldiers they had lost in this war. Edward had defeated Mace's 27,000-men army and killed more than a half while capturing a lot. After taking third of the Rhea, their military power had decreased a lot, especially after House Rowan joined Edward's cause. The Tarly did not have anyone besides Lord Randyll and could not raise another army. As for the High Tower, who helped Rhaegar and sent 10,000 men to aid him in his war, they would not manage to send another army unless they wanted to anger Stormsland and the Crown. Only the Redwyne fleet stood without losses as Edward did not attack them. With the siege of Highgarden and the capture of Mace Tyrell and Randyll Tarly, she stood no chance against Edward and his army. The only option in front of Lady Olenna was to ask for peace from Edward and try to get as many benefits as she could since the Citadel had refused their request to hand Edward a copy of every book. Lady Olenna got a headache since she had advised her idiotic son not to raise his banners against the rebellion and to wait and monitor the situation. She had heard about Edward and his achievements and knew that Edward and his brothers were true warriors that her idiotic son could not face. But her idiot son and the only heir to Highgarden refused to listen to the advice she gave him and caused all these problems. At first, Lady Olenna had thought to ally with Dorne and raise another rebellion. But not only Dorne had suffered the same fate as the Reach, but Prince of Baron Mardell was also grateful for what Edward did to avenge his sister. That did not mean they were allies, though. But Ashra, who was enjoying her time torturing the two dogs, had invited Baron to come to Storm's End to participate in her game. The two were acquaintances since she would visit Ely a lot in their childhood. Although Dorne was still angry at Edward for taking part in their land, he could not say anything, especially after seeing the Reach's fate, and could only thank the Seven for their mercy. When Lady Olenna visited Stormsland, Stannis was there to receive her. Actually, he got forced to face her because of Edward. Edward did not take Dragonstone yet as he was waiting for the birth of Daenerys. Even after receiving Robert's request multiple times to take the island and capture the young prince, Edward ignored him. Robert was angry that he ordered Jon to build the royal fleet in order for him to use it to kill the last Targaryen's blood. When Stannis heard about this, he came to question his brother. His brother had promised to give Dragonstone to him, so why he was waiting? But Edward assured him that he had sent Bruce to surround the island, and they would take the island after Robert's coronation. It was the time for Daenerys' birth. After Lady Olenna entered the hall, she could see the muscular body of Edward. Edward was at his prime age at the moment, and his body was tall and wide. Although he could not compare to the Mountain, he was taller than Robert. After seeing Lady Olenna, who had just entered, Edward stood up to greet her. Lady Olenna was one of the people he admired in Westeros, especially her political view. She was a far-sighted woman, but she got idiots for a son and a grandson. Only Margaery took a little from the woman, but she was not on the same level too. It is an honor to meet you, Lady Olenna. Please, have a seat, said Edward as he stood up to help Lady Olenna take her seat. He behaved like a gentleman here, unlike how he treated the others, causing Stannis to look at him weirdly. Is this the usual lie that you tell everyone, Lord Baratheon? Joked Olenna as she did not deny Edward's offer and took her seat. It was the first time that she had met Edward. Although she heard a lot about him, she did not have the honor to meet him till this moment. She enjoyed the tales she had heard about him, though. Not at all. It is not every day that someone as beautiful as Lady Olenna will visit us here. So what can I do for you? Asked Edward with a smile. He wanted to play with this woman a little as she was one of the most intelligent ones out there. Cut the crap, boy. You know why I am here. The Citadel refused to give you a copy of all the books, but I want my son back, so what else can we offer you? Asked Lady Olenna straight away. She knew that Edward wanted to play with her here a little, but she was getting a headache all this time. She had promised her late husband to take care of the house after his death, But her son made everything difficult for her. Edward just smiled at her. He had always wanted to have this conversation with Olenna, as he always enjoyed her talks from the show. Chapter 130, End of the Rebellion and Edward's Coronation. Haha, I am behaving nicely here, Lady Olenna. But since I respect you too much, I will only demand copies of only half the books present in the Citadel. That is my bottom line. I believe my brother has delivered the message to you already, said Edward with a smile as he looked at her. Fine, but I want the captured soldiers back, said Olenna as she saw Edward's expression. She knew that Edward would not change his mind regarding this matter, so she turned to another problem. Ho, that depends on how much you could pay for them, said Edward with another smile. He wanted to take every benefit that he could from the Reach. The books of the Citadel are enough, said Lady Olenna as she was not willing to fork more money. House Tyrole's relationship with House Hightower and the Citadel would deteriorate after demanding to get the books for Edward, and she thought that was enough price. For Lady Olenna, I will only free 5,000 men for the books. Any more, you would have to pay for them, said Edward with a calm voice. Yet, he was the one giving in this time as the Citadel's books were more important. He might even find a way to create weapons from the wildfire. The Meesters in the Citadel must have studied the wildfire's characteristics before. Seeing Edward was not going to give in any more, she could only go with that. The Tyrell would have to live with this humiliation if they wanted to survive. She wondered why Edward did not attack Highgarden and only besieged it. If he did, would not all the Reach fall in his hands? The only way she could think of to get more benefits for the Tyrells to help them get back on their legs was by marrying her future granddaughter to one of Edward's sons. It would be better if she married her granddaughter to Edward's heir, and her granddaughter would be the queen by then. What about the lands and castles you took from the Reach? Can we pay for them as well? Asked Olenna, giving herself some hope. The Reach got divided and weakened a lot at the moment. And their only way to reach King's Landing was to pass through the New Kingdom. That would mean they would have to pay more taxes to travel. Did not you hear the saying that said what is taken by force, never returned nor replaced? So sorry for that, but these castles and towns would be a part of Stormsland now, said Edward with a calm voice. Of course, Edward would never accept to return the lands to the Reach, or he would be an idiot if he did something like that. And Edward would be remembered in history as the Fool King. But you could take the lords who want to follow you if you want. As for their wealth, I had already taken the wealth of those who fought against us, said Edward with a smile. He did not want those fellows. Edward had already killed the previous lords, but their descendants would bear a grudge against Edward and his sons. He could not kill them right now as he was trying to annex all the lands he took and did not want the new lords to fear him more than they already did. No, you can keep those useless bunch, said Olenna as she thought that the Reach would not benefit from them. They would be a burden instead, as they would need resources to build a new home for themselves. Plus, the other lords would not allow them to take parts of their territories. After discussing for some more time, Lady Olenna left after getting some more benefits for her house. She suggested a marriage between one of her future granddaughters with one of Edward's sons, and Edward told her that he would think about it. In fact, after hearing her words, Edward wanted to laugh out loud. He always liked people who were shameless enough in order to help their families. Tywin and Olenna were such people. They would discard everything for an alliance with another great house if they thought this alliance would benefit the family. At the moment, he almost secured 3 of his sons' marriages. A Targaryen girl for his Raymond. A Lannister for another son. At the moment, he also secured a Tyrell. Edward only needed his sons to get born, as he needed to know which kingdom he would need to secure another marriage with him. Edward's next plan was the north. He wanted a daughter for the Vale. As for Riverland and Iron Islands, Edward planned to kill the Tullys and Greyjoys 3. His plan for Dorne would depend if he had another child. If Edward had another daughter, he would wed her to Doran's son. But if he had no more children, Edward planned to wipe out the Martells and take Dorne for himself. A month later in King's Landing, Ned, who had left Stormsland not long ago, arrived at the city for Robert's coronation. He carried Jon with him as he moved in the streets of King's Landing in the Red Keep's direction, followed by Hal and Reed. It did not take them long before both of them arrived at the Red Keep, where the coronation of King Robert I would take place. When they entered the hall, they found almost all Westeros's except Stormsland and Dorne's lords. Stormsland's lords did not come because Stormsland would turn into the new kingdom of the Storms. As for Dorne, they did not come because of what happened to Elia Martell. After the coronation, Ned did not stay in King's Landing and took his way to Riverrun, where he left his wife. After taking her, he would return to the north. A month after the coronation, Daenerys Targaryen was born, and Edward's fleets took the island after sending Daenerys and her brother to Braavos on a ship. Stannis got the lands that Edward promised to give to him. 3 months later, it was finally time for Edward's coronation. All the lords of Stormsland and some lords of Westeros came to Storm's End to witness the birth of the first Storm King. When Edward entered the hall, everyone started to kneel. To his right, Ashera walked there in a beautiful dress that suited her as the Storm Queen. Raymond and Cassandra, who carried Axel, followed them. Stannis followed behind the group as he was also a prince in the new kingdom. When Edward sat on his new throne, the speaker started to announce his title. You stand in the presence of Edward of House Baratheon, the first of his name, the descendant of the old Storm Kings, king of the storms and marches, protector of the storms, the mighty stag, the schemer, the creator of the Tomb of Thousand. Said the speaker to announce all Edward's titles. 8. Chapter 131, 15 years later. Edward signaled for everyone to stand up before the ceremonies started. The following days in Storm's End were special. No one could describe the joy in every town and castle, as they knew that their situation would get better and better after King Edward I ascended the throne. There were celebrations in every corner of Stormsland in order to celebrate the ascension of the new King of Storms. 15 years passed fast since Edward's coronation as the Storm King. Edward was on his way to Winterfell at the moment. A lot had happened in those years, and many events took place. As for the moment, Jon Arryn had just died in King's Landing, and Robert would send his letter any moment now to Ned Stark to tell him that he was coming to the north too. We will go through the events in this period through the journey. I am not going to go through event after event. When we reach some point, the event will resurface as a memory. Edward decided to travel to the north at this time for 2 reasons. He wanted to send the criminals in the Kingdom of Storms himself to the Wall. Edward had been doing so since becoming the Storm King. He knew about the danger behind the Wall, and Edward decided to fill the Wall himself. It was part of Edward's great plans to face the Night King. Those men would help reduce the Night King's armies, and they had done so through the previous years. 5 Every 3 to 4 years, Edward would take all the criminals in the Kingdom of Storms to the Wall. The men he sent to the Wall were not just the criminals of the Storm Kingdom. Edward also sent the noble families who he had captured from the free cities to the Wall. Edward saw that was the rightful punishment for those pigs who tortured and killed slaves here, and therefore, it all started 2 years after Edward ascended as the Storm King, in year 285 AC to be exact. This year had witnessed the death of the Archon of Tyrosh and the start of Edward's plans to take control of all the free cities. Edward's subordinates had already founded their own families in those cities, taking most of the noble families' places and trades. Edward would send his Shadow Legion to assassinate those masters and kill their families since he had started as the Lord of Storm's End. After that, his men would replace them and take their place in the cities. That meant this plan had taken about 8 years to complete, and it was finally fruitful. After the Archon of Tyrosh's death, Edward found that it was the best time to start his operation. His men assassinated the remaining magisters from the old governments and took their places. Every noble family living in the 3 cities was under Edward's men's full control. The other families he did not manage to control before the Archon of Tyrosh's death got sent to the Wall, where they would get their asses kicked. He even asked the men of the Night's Watch to play with him. He would not mind if they got raped by the lonely men there. Not only the 3 cities, but similar things also happened in another 4 cities. Volantis, Cahir, Norvis, and Lorth came to similar situations, but later than the 3 cities of Tyrosh, Lys, and Myr. Volantis fell into his hand in 287 AC, while Cahir and Norvis in year 289 AC, 290 AC, respectively. Edward had started his plans for taking Volantis in the same year as the 3 free cities. It only took so long because the families in Volantis had deep roots in the shit, not to mention the many families that lived in Volantis. Edward thought that the same plan could work in Volantis. He thought that killing Volantis's noble families would allow his men to control the city after taking those families' place in trades. But it was much more problematic than he thought, as Volantis had many families that did not mind competing for the others' wealth. That created many competitors for Edward's men. But in the end, his men managed to take Volantis with all its wealth after 10 years of careful planning. Cahir and Norvis were much easier to control when compared to Volantis, but the problem was that the 2 cities were inland, not to mention the Dothraki. Those fucking animals would kill any traitors and caused much trouble to his men. Edward swore to eliminate them all. As for Lorth, it fell in Edward's hands only in year 292 AC because Edward did not invest much effort in the city before like the others because it was far away and lay in Braavos' domain. Actually, Edward tried to do the same thing in Braavos, but the system used in Braavos made it hard for him to take the city. After 10 years of planning and seeing that there would not be many results, Edward decided to give up on Braavos and think of taking Lorth instead. He intended to take Braavos by force and would use Lorth as a base to surround Braavos and cut down their trade. The reason Edward had decided to use force against Braavos was they're trying to instigate the other free cities against him. After Edward took the 3 cities, he did something foolish. Edward always dreamt of taking control of all the exits to the South Sea. He wanted to control all the trade routes and take them for himself. He pretended that he negotiated with the 3 cities' magisters, who announced later that the 3 cities would join the Kingdom of Storms. The declaration of the 3 cities shocked the world as it had never happened before. There was never a similar accident where a free city got controlled by some lord from Westeros. Plus, Edward already had full control over the Septstones and had enough influence. Braavos, Volantis, which did not fall in Edward's grasp yet, and the rest of the free cities decided to attack the cities to free and save the cities. Of course, Edward knew what they wanted. The last time Volantis said something like that, they controlled Lysanmere for 2 generations. After making that decision, Edward discovered how foolish he was. If he had waited to take the rest of the 3 cities before announcing that, he would have avoided the war, or at most, he would only have to face Braavos. Since Edward was more brutal than Daenerys Targaryen and had killed all the masters and their families or sent them to the wall, he did not have to worry about the intern matters and only need to focus on the war matters outside the cities. After all, without the help of the masters in the cities, there was no one that could help the sellswords enter the cities and cause harm like what happened in Meereen in Daenerys' rule. Chapter 132, The War Against the Free Cities. Although Edward thought he acted foolishly for taking this decision, he also saw it as the best opportunity to train his armies. Edward had issued a law that every man in the kingdom that had passed their 20th names day would have to apply for the central army for 2 years. Of course, Edward had issued some kind of identity card for every citizen in the kingdom. Although it was not perfect and could get replicated, it helped to organize the things somehow. Edward did something like that after thinking about the situation of losing many men from his many armies. He would have to replace those men or raise another army from those trained men. This war between the Kingdom of Storms and the Free Cities attracted the whole region's attention, especially the lords in Westeros. But since there was an agreement between the 2 sides, King's Landing did not have to send any men to help. Only Lord Arryn and Ned Stark offered to help, but Edward stopped them. Edward found it a good chance to train and test his new military system. Edward had asked the lords of the Kingdom of Storms to rotate their men every 2 years. He also suggested building a central military power that would govern every army in the kingdom. Edward did that so that the soldiers of every lord would have loyalty to other regions. Plus, he wanted to weaken the control of those lords. Although this decision had faced some objections from the lords as some of the lords asked Edward why they would pay the men if they would protect someone else, it still passed after Edward reminded them of what happened during the rebellion. Of course, Edward would not act like that without giving them some benefits. He increased the trade between the houses and paved more roads that made the trade between the lords much easier. He also came up with multiple ideas so that each house could have its own specialty that would help them increase their wealth. In the end, after seeing those benefits, all the lords agreed to send half of their men. Edward thought that it was enough and moved on. The battle between Edward and the Free Cities started. They sent a fleet of 1,200 ships while also sending 70,000 soldiers through the lands. It was enough forces capable of destroying any great house in Westeros, but Edward thought that he could manage to defeat them. During the years, Edward did not stop making ships for 1 second. Not only that, but he also started improving the ships after consulting the crafters in his lands. Edward's ships had reached a high number of 1,050 ships with about 250 commercial fleets. That meant that he had nearly 800 strong and invincible ships in his hand. Plus, the fleets that he took from the 3 cities numbered 600 ships. Although they were not of the same quality as Edward's ships, they were on the same level, if not better than Braavos and Volantis' ships. The naval battles were the first battles in this war. Edward gave Bruce only one order, that was to sink all Braavos' ships. Braavos was the most powerful free city, especially their fleet, They even prevented Pentas from having their own fleet so they could control the seas. If they managed to destroy the Braavosi fleet this time, they would have a chance to take the city in the future. The Free Cities attacked Myr and Lys simultaneously, with Braavos's fleet as the main one in attacking Myr, while Volantis's was the main one in attacking Lys. Edward participated himself in the war to supervise how the war moved on. The battles continued for 3 days straight without stopping. Even if Edward's ship were much superior, a fleet of 1,200 ships would not fall that easily. After 3 days of battles, Edward's fleet managed to destroy the whole fleet of Braavos. Not a single ship managed to return to Braavos. As for Volantis, since Edward's fleet was not insistent on taking every ship down, they managed to return with 140 ships. Edward lost a lot in this battle as well. War on this scale would always result in catastrophe for both sides. But Edward fared much better. He lost about 300 ships that belonged to the 3 cities with another 40 ships of his. The losses of his men's lives were not on the same level as the previous battles, though. Edward had come up with an idea to use ropes at the bottom of the ships. This tactic allowed the sailors whose ships got destroyed to save themselves by using ropes tied in every ship too. After this battle, everyone knew one thing. The seas had new owners from this moment forward. If anyone wanted to travel to the South Sea to the Free Cities or the Slavers Bay, he would have to pay for the sea's rulers. Edward made use of this opportunity to surround Braavos. After this battle, they did not manage to raise a fleet again. Even their commercial ships got sunk by Edward's fleets. They tried to recruit other free cities to build a fleet for them, though. They only have one thing, and that was gold. Edward only found out after he took the other cities like Volantis and Lorth. He even suspected they asked the Slavers Bay cities to do their jobs. As for the ground battle, Edward preferred to have a siege battle this time as this land was not his. Edward did not know that Iranan would be at a disadvantage if he fought them head-on. Plus, he could only send 30,000 men in this short time, so he hired another 7,000 men from the Shadow Legion Company as well. Of course, Edward might lose this time, and the Free Cities might have a chance to take Myr if he left the situation just like that. So Edward came up with 2 plans that would help him. He decided to pressure Volantis through his men in the city and his fleet that surrounded Volantis after their defeat. He negotiated with Triarch of Volantis and came up with an agreement. They agreed to help him. They would stab the Free Cities' armies in the back while Edward would not attack the city for 10 years and would not destroy their ships. He would also not prevent their ships from trading. Edward smirked and agreed to their request. The city would be under his control in 3 years at most, and this agreement got wasted. He promised not to attack the city, not the families. The other plan that Edward came up with was the Dothraki. He attracted 2 great cows with women, food, and horses. The cows agreed to attack the Free Cities' armies as well. Chapter 133, Storm's Eye, the 6th and most populated city in Westeros. After all those preparations, the battle was one-sided, and the whole Free Cities' army got killed. The Golden Company was among them, and they got butchered to the last one. That was the reason why after Volantis, Cahir, Norvis, and Lorth decided to join the kingdom, no city dared to raise its voice. Even the always brave city of Braavos made a decision to shut up and guard their city. At the moment, only Braavos and Pentas were not under Edward's rule. Edward had set his eyes next on Braavos and the Slavers Bay. As for Karth, Edward had managed to raise one of his men to be one of the groups who controlled the city after killing Zeros Hondaxis. He became one of the 13 after taking the name of Xenocree I. That was most of the events that happened in those years regarding the Free Cities. If Edward defeated the Dothraki, he would control the western part of Essos. He could leave them to his sons so that they would not fight with each other. The other reason why Edward decided to visit the north, especially at this time, was to take Jon Snow with him. He knew that after Robert's visit, he was supposed to leave for the Wall. But due to Edward's intervention, Jon had some hope in his life. Edward and his 200 men were about to reach Winterfell. Edward looked at the castle from a little far and could not help but remember the nice time he had spent in this castle. Although he visited the north every 3 to 5 years, he would still miss this quiet place. When Edward entered the castle with his men, he could see the people standing by the roadsides to look at the most famous person in Westeros. Not only did he rule the most powerful kingdom in Westeros, but he also defeated the Free Cities of Essos and controlled most of them. He was the first man in Westeros to do that. Only the great Valyria could compare to his kingdom in the east part of Essos. Edward intended to kill the Dothraki and take the vast Dothraki Sea in the next 2 years. With this, he could call himself the ruler of the West Essos. The Gis Empire's cities would fall under his control sooner or later. And when he controlled Westeros, Edward's empire would be the greatest empire that the world had seen. Not the Dawn Empire, not the Empire of Yeti, not Valyria, but the future Storm's Empire 3. When Edward saw the Stark and his wagon stopped, everyone kneeled. Although he was not the king of the North nor Westeros, he was a king after all. Even Ned Stark knelt. Edward could only shake his head after seeing this. Although he was only away from the North for 5 years, everyone was an adult at the moment. The only person that Edward did not stomach was Lady Catelyn Stark, the Lady of Winterfell. Edward got down from his horse and came close to the kneeling group. He stood before Ned and spoke. "Stand up, Ned. How many times did I tell you not to do that?" asked Edward as he looked at the smiling Ned. "And how can I do that when the Storm King is standing in front of me?" joked Ned as he smiled at Edward. The two of them grew closer by the years. Edward would visit Winterfell himself or send one of his sons in his place during the last 15 years. Ned himself broke his isolation and visited Edward in Storm's Eye 2 times during those years. You all probably are wondering what Storm's Eye is, right? Due to the large increase in the new kingdom's population after Edward's coronation, Edward decided to build a new city as the capital. Edward chose the area north of the parchments on the shores of the narrow sea for this city. It took nearly 10 whole years to finish this city, since it was bigger than even King's Landing. The reason why it took so much time to complete was the growing population every year. The city got modified every year to suit the new situation. In the middle of the city stood a large keep where Edward and his family would live. This keep had 4 different buildings with a large hall in the middle that connected the 4 buildings. Each building was facing a direction, so they got called the North Keep, the East Keep, the West Keep, and the South Keep. The 4 buildings altogether got called the Storm Keep too. The East Keep was where the king and queen lived. The West Keep was where the princes lived. The North was for the rest of the family. The South was for the king's guards and where most of the halls existed. 12 towers got built around the keep so that no creature could pass without getting killed. The 8 commanders resided in the 8 towers while leaving one of their families to run their new territory. The other 4 towers were for the Hand, the Master of Coin, the Master of Ships, the Master of Whispers, the Master of Law, and the Grand Maester. Around the 12 towers was an artificial lake connected to the wind water that ran through the city. At the 4 corners of the lake stood a September, a temple for the Lord of Light, a temple for the Many Faces God, and a small godswood. We will get to why Edward introduced all those religions later. Every location of those 4 was the start of a main street in the city. Those streets got named after the 4 religions. They were Arhalar Street, Many Faces Street, the 7th Street, and the Old Street. Those 4 streets got then connected by the 5 quadra streets. Those 5 minor streets were in the shape of a circle connecting the 4 major ones. There was only a small street from the first of the 5 quadra streets to the bridge connected to the keep. A tall wall with a height of 28 meters and a width of 10 meters surrounded the city. Due to those characteristics, it got called the Storm Barrier. To the side of the sea, a large port that could take in more than 500 ships at the same time stood there. After seeing the finished product, Edward got surprised. This design had even impressed him. After announcing to the whole realm about the new city, it took only 1 year before the city got populated to its maximum capacity. A near 2 million persons were living in the city at the moment. You might be wondering how the population could rise by this much in such a short time. Actually, the reason was Edward's new law, which forced everyone living in the kingdom to have at least 3 children in this generation. Edward wanted to populate his land so that he could find labor and soldiers for his army. And since he was rich enough that he actually opened a bank, he could afford to do so too. Chapter 134, Edward's plans for the slaves in Essos. As for Storm's End, it was the seat of the first prince at the moment. Edward would start training his son at the age of 8. They would learn how to rule and how to use the sword and other weapons. Once they reached the age of 13, they would get named lords. They would have a castle and territory to rule with the help of Edward's men. But during the visit to the north, they all must accompany their father. Although that was the case, Edward would send his adult sons to Essos, especially to Cahir and Norvis, every 6 months. He wanted them to gain more experience by fighting the Dothraki hordes around the cities. He would wipe the Dothraki in 2 years, So he wanted his sons to use them as training dolls. Edward also wanted them to experience leading cities this large and experience how heavy this burden it was. Since Edward did not prevent slavery or free the slaves as Daenerys did, it became much harder to rule those cities. Demolishing the slave laws at once would be the wrong decision as most of the free cities depended on the slave trade to build their economy. So Edward came up with another plan. He would set a new system that would allow the slaves to redeem their freedom if they wanted to, but after gaining enough merits for themselves. Although some small noble houses in those cities opposed Edward's decision, he got rid of them all. At the moment, the whole governments of those cities were under Edward's full control. After knowing about this decision, many slaves tried to earn enough merits to free themselves or their children, at least. Of course, there were some who were already satisfied with their status and did not try to free themselves. Some people found it an honor to be a slave, so Edward did not bother them. Of course, Edward's system would not prevent slavery as more slaves would get caught, and Edward did not plan to stop this. Since this trade is a lifeline to those cities, Edward did not see a reason to stop them. Those strong ones would not get caught by those slave merchants, and since this was a world where the strong ate the weak, Edward's system gave them enough mercy. Edward's rule gave them the chance to change their fate, so if they wanted to do that, all they had to do was to work hard for 2 to 6 years. That depended on how much effort and talent they had. The slave trade volume would decrease but would not disappear. Of course, Edward prevented them from catching anyone from Westeros, or at least his kingdom. He wanted them to focus on Ivy and Summer Islands. The former was a strong race that had enough talent in nearly everything. Although they were a little ugly and did not suit a bed slave trade, they could work in every other industry. The latter was a beautiful race with attractive characteristics. Edward had visited the island not long ago and was amazed by the beauty of its people. The part of Essos is not finished. I only wanted to break it into parts and show them when the time comes. Every 1 or 2 chapters will contain Edward's plans in the past 15 years. The reason for doing something like that is that I don't wish for it to be boring. Edward smiled at the joking Ned before turning his head to acknowledge the other Starks. Edward had to greet the annoying Catelyn Stark first as he had to show some respect to Ned's wife. So although he hated this woman for treating Jon like that, he had to show some respect. "Lady Stark," said Edward as he nodded his head to her. He was not going to act familiar with her like Robert did when he visited Winterfell. Edward gave her the basic respect only for Ned's sake, and this was enough. "Your Grace," said Catelyn with a smile on her face as she greeted Edward with courtesy. She did not realize the contempt hidden in Edward's eyes for her. Although her father had warned her before about Edward and asked her not to anger him, she did not find anything for her father's worries. After seeing her smile, Edward felt a little disgusted down there. The only one who did not fit the North in his eyes was this Catelyn. If she did not adapt to the North, she did not have to marry a Stark. Edward thought that she hated Lyanna for Brandon's death since the man died when he was about to take her from Riverrun to marry her. But since she would die soon anyway, Edward decided to let her live for the moment. She had already performed her duties by giving birth to the Stark's children, so her death would not matter much anyway. Edward then turned his eyes to the young man standing to Ned's right. He could see that the young wolf had grown up and was at the right age to lead his army against the Lannister. The last time Edward saw the group was 4 years ago. So everyone had changed in his eyes, especially the young children. As for Ned, he grew older. Edward wanted to joke with him about if he had the ability to lift his sword. "Ah, young Robb. You have grown a lot. Come here and let your Uncle Edward give you a hug," said Edward with a laugh as he greeted the young wolf. Although this young man was inexperienced and did not have what it take to win a war, he was a good commander. Maybe after experiencing more wars and schemes for some more years, Robb could have grown to the same level as Randyll Tarly. Sadly, he made that stupid decision and preferred love over everything else, and died in the end. Something like love did not have to exist during wartime. Love was something only acceptable during peacetime, although it would cause some problems as well. But these problems could get managed to reduce their effects. If Robb had done something like that, Edward might find him a brave young man. But discarding your word when you were in the man's territory was a wrong decision, not to mention that the man was lending you his men. Edward had thought of giving him some head-up or advice to remind him of something like that in this timeline. By doing that, he would cause more trouble to the Lannister. Though, Edward would prefer to see Catelyn Stark die in that red wedding. Chapter 135, Some of Edward's Plans Towards the Stark Children. Uncle Edward, "It is great to see you again," said Robb as he came close and gave Edward a hug. Edward tried to get close to all the Stark's children, as all of them had some fate that made them capable of doing something out of normal. Not to mention Robb, who got crowned as the king in the north. You could see what I am talking about by looking at Jon, Bran, Arya, and Sansa. They all had great things they would do in the near future. 3 Haha, you grow up to be a strong young man. I don't know who would win this time if you fought Axel, said Edward as he joked around with the young Robb. He knew that Robb looked up to Axel and Raymond, who was so excellent in everything, which made every lord in Westeros had heard about their deeds already. Of course, he knew who would win. Edward was strict in his children's training, turning their life a living hell in their eyes due to his actions. Even the girls did not get out of it non-beaten. Edward knew that his children were his only weaknesses at the moment, and he had to act like that so they could protect themselves too. Robb smiled after hearing what Edward said. He knew that Edward was joking as well. He had already heard about the news regarding Axel fighting in Essos and slaying some Khal of the Dothraki hordes not long ago. Edward's children were really different from other families' children. Nothing came easy to them, and they knew that. They had seen how Edward had put his heart aside to train them. And after seeing the ugly world outside, they knew why their father insisted on telling them when they reached their 8th name's day that he would disown anyone who did not achieve anything during his life. That was why every one of them had spent most of their time training as hard as they could. They would attend every meeting their father had to learn from him. Edward then saw Sansa standing next to Robb. Although Edward only liked Sansa after she got humiliated time after time in King's Landing and on Ramsay Bolton's hands, he did not want her to get this smart in this life. He could not let her try to separate the North from the rest of the kingdom. If she did something like that, Edward did not mind taking the North by power. He planned to marry her to his son, but not for the moment, at least since he wanted Ned to travel to King's Landing. "Look at you, little Sansa. You look the same as little Lyanna from back then," said Edward as he smiled at first, then turned sad after mentioning Lyanna. Of course, he faked this expression as he wanted to let everyone standing around him know that he did not forget Lyanna. The news of that day had already reached Winterfell. Ned also told his children how Edward had helped him, and without Edward's help, he might not be able to retrieve Lyanna's body. They knew that Edward sent Lyanna to the north on one of his ships. That was one of the reasons why every Stark looked at Edward's favorably. Ned, who heard Lyanna's name mentioned her by Edward, looked sad a little as he remembered how he found his sister covered in her blood after giving birth to the little Jon, but he tried not to show this. They did not want to ruin the reunion with Edward and his family. "I am grateful for your praise, Your Grace," said Sansa with a smile, but her eyes did not leave his first son, Raymond. Though her eyes would shift every once in a while to look at Edward's third son, Lionel Baratheon, and his twin brother, Orys Baratheon, who were close to her age. Sansa, at the moment, was the naive version of her and was still dreaming of marrying a prince so that she could be a queen. But since Edward wanted Ned to go to King's Landing, he did not propose a marriage between Sansa and one of his sons. Edward would let his sons talk with her, though. He had discussed some of his plans with his children. Most of them were at a suitable age to discuss these important matters with him. Edward planned to take Sansa as his daughter by law, but he had to wait till he rescued her from King's Landing after Ned's death. He would do that to gain her loyalty. He would let her hear his advice to her father before he went to King's Landing with Robert I. Edward then saw his favorite character from the show after Petyr Baelish, Arya fucking Stark. At first, Edward did not think of any plan to marry one of his sons to the girl since he already had his eyes on Sansa to rule the North. But at that time, Ashra had given birth to twins 2 times in a row, raising the number of Edward's children to 7. 5 boys and 2 girls were the exact numbers of Edward's children. Plus, he had adopted a girl from the wilding that he saved back then. We would get to this later. 9 Haha, little Arya, how are you, little one? You still behave like a tomboy as always, said Edward with a laugh, getting another small giggle from the young girl. Edward would always joke with her that he would marry her to one of his sons. And one of the reasons that he came here this time was to propose the marriage between Arya and his youngest son, William. Edward had lost all his hopes about this son of his. He was not ambitious and did not care about anything in the world except traveling around the world. William caused Edward a headache after a headache. He tried to shape this boy the same way he did to his other sons, but to no avail. 6 Aside from his training that his father had forced him to do, William would always sneak around to travel. But he would take a night with him to train, or his father would kill him if he saw that his level had deteriorated. Since Edward did not plan to have this child, he saw no reason to prevent him from doing what he wanted. He let him travel around Westeros in the last 2 years. Edward had only decided to let him marry Arya when the little brat asked him before they left for the north, a question that made Edward knew that only Arya was suitable for him. They both had the same dream and would act unruly as always. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136, Edward's Headache. Edward signaled for everyone to stand up before the ceremonies started. The following days in Storm's End were special. No one could describe the joy in every town and castle, as they knew that their situation would get better and better after King Edward I ascended the throne. There were celebrations in every corner of Storm's Land in order to celebrate the ascension of the new King of Storms. The brat came to Edward when Edward was having a meeting with his hand, Stannis, and the rest of the small council. Since Edward had not seen him for more than a year and a half, he allowed him to sit by the side for a moment till he finished his meeting. While Edward was discussing critical matters regarding their operation against Bravos, the brat asked in a loud voice, "What lies west of Westeros, father?" asked the brat, Will.i.am, with a loud voice interrupting the meeting. After hearing Will.i.am's question, the other smiled while Stannis fell into his thoughts. If Stannis did not have duties, Edward believed that a man who liked the marine life would travel the world. Though, Edward doubted that with this dual personality of his would succeed in this job. "And what do you need from the west of Westeros? Should not you think more about Westeros and lift some burdens from your brothers?" asked Edward with some annoyance in his heart. He did not know what to do with this son of his. He only left him on his own because there was peace in Westeros at the moment, or else he would not allow him to travel like that. Will.i.am was a little reckless and made him worry a lot. Edward also started to think that the brat's question was somewhat familiar to him. He sensed that he had heard him in some place. A lot of time had passed since Edward came to this world. All of this time made his memory start fading a little by little. He began to forget some events and pieces of knowledge from his memory. That was why he started noting down all the vital information in his head on papers so that he would not forget any event. But after hearing his son's next request, he knew where he had heard this sentence before. He knew it was the same fucking question that Arya had asked Jon Snow at the end of the show. After that, she took a ship and headed west. He knew that there was no hope for the son, so why not let him marry a girl with the same head? Edward always wondered why Will.i.am would get along well with Arya, who did not have many friends even in Winterfell. But it seemed that the same birds flocked together. "Father, I want to head west. Can you lend me a ship?" requested the young Will.i.am, surprising everyone present. That was the request that made Edward remember Arya's question. "Work for it yourself. If your performance satisfies me, I will allow it. Before that, I will let the men shut you down before you even attempt to do something like that," said Edward after making his decision. He decided to leave Westeros himself after defeating the rest and enjoying the last moves of the game. He would let his sons take care of the new empire after that. The little brat nodded his head after hearing his father's words. He knew his father did not break his promise to any of his children if they did their best and earned a name for themselves. Edward was strict and lenient at the same time. He would never allow them to ignore their training, whether the physical one or the mental. After the conversation, Will.i.am visited his father at night. He wanted to know what to do to earn his father's approval. "Father, what do you want me to do?" the 11-year-old brat asked Edward as he barged into his bedroom to ask him this question. Edward wanted to shout at the few guards outside and punish them for letting this unruly brat enter the room, but he decided to ignore it as it was not their problem but this brat. "This time when we go to the north, I will ask your Uncle Ned for his daughter, Arya's hand. You will marry her," said Edward as he sighed while dealing with this son of his. His twin sister did not tire him like that. "But I want to travel. I don't want to marry and stay here in Westeros," said the brat as he retorted Edward's words. "Don't worry, idiot. She had the same metallic head as you. She is an unruly brat like you," said Edward, remembering Arya's attitude. If she got born a boy instead and did not have Catelyn Stark to put her down, she would be as annoying as his son. "I am unruly?" said the brat in a surprised tone as if he did not know something like that. Edward did not wait and at once kicked the annoying brat and chased him out of his room. Raising a kid was much difficult than he thought. After this conversation, everything moved in the same direction as Edward planned. And that took us here to Winterfell. After the young Arya giggled a little after hearing Edward's words, she got hit by her sister next to her while Catelyn gave her the eye. Arya shut up at once after that and tried to greet Edward courteously. "To your grace," said Arya with a smile that did not look like a smile as she tried to greet Edward with courtesy, but she looked funny after trying to do so. Will.i.am came close at the moment and started laughing. He, Arya, and Teresa, Will.i.am's twin sister, were friends since they were close in age. In the last visit to the north, the three came close to each other. "You look funny when you do something like that, Arya," said Will.i.am as he laughed, ignoring the looks his brothers were giving him. The brat was not like his brothers at all and behaved like a ruffian. But he shut up after Arya's resentful look. The idiot called her by her boyish name, and she would get punished by her mother. "Shut up, Will," shouted the little girl. She was ready to fight Will.i.am had done. How dare he laugh at her after the torture she had been through to do this? "Arya," said Catelyn as she glared at Arya. She did not want her to disrespect the prince, especially in front of Edward. "Ha, it is okay. I always find this part of little Arya the same as Lyanna, right, Ned?" said Edward as he laughed at Arya's behavior. He was right to choose her as his son's bride. Ned could only smile at Edward and shook his head. He knew that Arya's behavior was the same as Lyanna's. But that behavior in his eyes was what got Lyanna to her death, so Ned did not think of stopping his wife's tries to change Arya's attitude. He believed that if Arya behaved more like a lady, she would not face a similar situation as his sister. 4. Chapter 137, Brandon Stark, the Three-Eyed Raven. "Don't worry, little one. I still like your character," said Edward as he wanted to console the little girl whose mother would always put down. Actually, Edward wanted all his son's future wives to be like Arya but less problematic if possible. Edward could not do with a weak girl like Sansa, who got almost raped in King's Landing because she could not defend herself or use her head. Edward did not have time to educate her one step by one step, so he decided to leave her in King's Landing in order to learn in a much faster way. Of course, Edward knew that strength was not everything. Look at Brienne of Tarth. Although she was a brave warrior, she got almost raped as well. But that act was by the soldiers' hands. At least, it was not the small folks as what almost happened to Sansa. Arya giggled a little and used her elbow to push Sansa next to her. Arya knew that Sansa always dreamt of getting on Edward's good side so that she could marry one of her sons, since Sansa wanted to become a princess. Sansa would always talk about that in front of her. She would always tell Arya that she would marry a prince in the future while she would not find anyone who would marry her. But look at her at the moment, without doing anything ladylike as Sansa, she got Edward's attention all that time. Not to mention that Edward always joked with Arya about taking her as a wife for his son. Sansa, who stood next to Arya and felt Arya's hit, got angry, and her face turned red. She always listened to her mother's words and trained to act like a lady, but she still could not get the prince of her dreams. Edward, who was standing in front of the two, just smiled and did not say anything. He would not prevent Arya from her child's play. Edward only wondered if Ned was also suffering while raising Arya, since Edward did not want anything more than kicking his youngest son every time Edward got to see him. It also came to Edward that he would suffer double from this moment since he would raise two headaches simultaneously. Edward then moved to greet the next one of the Stark who stood next to Arya. It was none other than the famous Brandon Stark, the future Three-Eyed Raven. Bran was still a little brat at the moment, who could not cause any damage to Edward at the moment. Edward really wanted to kill him when he was young, since that would help him considerably. Without Brandon exposing what he did or what his intentions were, Edward would have no worries. Until this moment, Edward did not know if killing Bran or letting him live for the moment was the best option. Edward knew that without Bran, the Night King would not have the ability to cross the wall or even destroy it. He could only come close to it, thanks to the mark he left on Bran. Yet, he would surely be able to cross the wall in the end when his power reached a certain level, but Edward could not let that happen. The current Night King was already a piece of bad news that could turn all Westeros into his dead army, so imagine a much more powerful version of him. Yet, Edward could leave this problem for his sons to face, since he could hold on till he died, but Edward would be sending them to their doom if he did something like that. With the Night King alive, The long night represented in a very long winter would cover the realm, turning everything he worked on into ashes. His sons would die in the end the same way his empire would. Although Edward did not want to rule, he wanted the history to remember his name always and at all times. Look at Bavaria, which history mentioned as the greatest empire of all time. Edward was sure that the empire he planned to build would be much more dominant than Valyria and more stable if he got rid of the Night King. So Edward had to use this chance to get rid of him while he was still weak. No one knew how much power the Night King would become if he let him hide behind the wall. That was the basis why Edward decided to let Brandon live, since there were more pros that far outweighed the cons. Plus, Edward had found a way 5 years ago to stop the vision from the three-eyed raven regarding him. As the priests told him, all the three-eyed raven could see was a white fog when it came to Edward. The memory would show, but the things Edward did that he did not want anyone to find anything about the three-eyed raven would not see them anymore. This matter took Edward a lot of time to solve. After 10 years of not getting any information about any way that could help him, Edward did not give up. He called back all his men that he sent to the eastern parts of Essos of Ashay, Yeti, and Carcosa, where the sorcerer lord lived, to find a solution. He called them back to gather all the information. They put their hands upon it. The next paragraph is different from the books and the show. It is a little fictional on my part. One, from their information, he found many clues to the three-eyed raven. It seemed that this phenomenon was not only in Westeros. There were 5 three-eyed ravens in total in the whole world that got mentioned in the information in the old scriptures of Ashay and the knowledge that he gathered. Ashay already had a living three-eyed raven living there, but using another name. The power was mostly the same though. In Ashay, he got referred to as the Shadow Eyes. He could control the shadows and the deformed animals and fish living in the Ash River to collect information about anything. Those old scriptures on the walls of Ashay were his doing. Every generation was responsible for recording the world's events on the walls of the famous city. That was why Ashay claimed to exist since the Age of Dawn. That was why they dared to call the city the first city in the whole world. Edward believed that it was true. Plus, the books that he took from the Citadel had mentioned something like that before. Although the Meisters thought of it as something fictional, Edward knew that everything was real. Magic and sorcery were real. The Night King was real. Edward did not know why they did not believe something like that when they must have known that sorcery existed in the eastern parts of Essos. The fools did not even believe in giants too. Chapter 138, Calling for Help and Information about the Far East. Anyway, after Edward collected the information from his men that he sent to the eastern cities of Essos, Edward spent 3 years reading the books he got from the Citadel, especially the ones about the ancient myths. After reading more than 2,000 books, Edward was finally able to find a way to hide his history from the eyes of the three-eyed raven. Not only just that, but Edward would also get protection from most magic in this world. Plus, he could practice the old sorcery and magic in 10 years. Yet, it would be a little late for him since he would be in his 40s by then, but it was better than none. Although he might not use it in the actions after Robert's death, it was better than nothing, for although he did find something like that, he did not find the materials or the things required to construct such rituals. Most of those ingredients only existed in the past, and he did not hear about them in recent years. Plus, even the people that could perform such magic rituals did not exist in this era anymore. Edward spent his days in a dilemma since he did not know what to do. The magic in this world had deteriorated a lot since ancient empire's doom, so Edward could only call for help. He needed help from those that had a connection with magic and sorcery in this world. His only knowledge about this topic was from the show and the books Edward got from the Citadel. He needed professionals if he wanted to get something like that done. Edward called a shadowbinder from Ashay called Maritha, a red priestess from Volantis called Kinvara, a sorcerer from the Empire of Yeti under the command of the Sorcerer Lord, and one of the Faceless Man. Edward knew that those people were his only hope to develop something like that. Of course, he would not discuss what these rituals were for or how he would use them. He only needed their help to make it. After they visited Edward in Storm's Eye, he gathered them in a secret hall in the East Keep. At that time, he had only built the September and the small gods' wood by the lake. Although he had made his plans to build the temples for the other religions, he did not do that until later. He wanted to use it to get more benefits from them, and this was a perfect opportunity. "We greet the Storm King," said the shadowbinder from Ashay. Edward had formed a great relationship with the city and was well known there. He knew what was short in the city and would send his fleet to the city filled with food and everything they needed. That was the reason that Shadowbinders would come to Storm's End and Storm's Eye every once in a while. Most people living in Ashay had a good impression of Edward and his Storm Kingdom. One thing Edward knew about Ashay after their relationship progressed: those people would not forget everyone that helped them once. Although Ashay was an important port located in the southeastern part of Essos, many merchant fleets would avoid it due to its nature. Not only was it challenging to reach the city, but they could die any moment on the way there. Only a few would pass by the city of Ashay and would use this chance to raise the food prices to take more gold from Ashay. That was the reason they once turned into pirates and started attacking the Empire of Ut. Edward's help to the city got him their appreciation. Edward's fleet would visit Ashay once a month at the very least and would not try to raise the food prices as the other merchants would. That led to the population of Ashay rising from only tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. You knew that this city was large enough to house King's Landing, Old Town, Volantis, and Karth together. So you could imagine how such a great city had only tens of thousands, where it could have more than millions of people instead. Among those tens of thousands were those who lived in the shadows or turned into shadows themselves. Those could not get counted as humans anymore since they could feed on the deformed life forms in the Ash River. They turned into mindless beasts that would attack anyone who entered their territory. When they heard that Edward needed some help from the Shadowender, they sent 10, not just one. Maritha was their leader, and she came herself to pay respect to the man that helped them from the far west. "We are grateful for the help from the Storm King," said the sorcerer Linboa, who came from the city of Carcosa. He came here, following the sorcerer lord, who claimed to be the 69th Yellow Emperor of Ut, orders. Edward had sent people to that city to study sorcery not long ago. He did so after his men confirmed that the sorcerer lord in Carcosa learned mighty sorcery, and they could use that chance to learn from him. When Edward found it a great opportunity and sent many people to learn magic and sorcery from Ashay and Carcosa, but according to his men, it would take decades for them to learn only the basics. Edward did not care, as he preferred to leave them to his sons after him. They could help his son raise an empire that left Valyria in the dust. Many books from those regions had already entered Edward's library, and he started reading those books already. Who in his right mind would refuse such an offer? If anyone got this chance to learn magic and still refused to do so, he was an idiot. The Meesters of the Citadel would die to learn something like that. Edward used this chance to get on the good side of the sorcerer lord in Carcosa without harming his relationship with the 17th Azure Emperor, Bugai, who ruled from Yin. If Yin was not an important port, Edward could have ignored him entirely, since Bugai did not have enough force to protect himself and his city against one of the generals. He could only control his city, Yin, with difficulty. But Edward, who wanted to link the East and West, decided to form good relationships with the two. He supported the sorcerer lord more, though. He sent food and enough needs that Carcosa needed. Although the sorcerer lord was powerful and had enough magic to protect himself, his armies and people were well known for their poverty. Edward knew that was the reason that a man as powerful as the sorcerer lord could not control Ut and defeat Bugai and Palco in Traitor Town. Chapter 139, Dealing with the Faceless Men. But with Edward's support in the 10 years, Carcosa's situation was much better. Edward even heard that the sorcerer lord started attacking the vast plains of Ut to take it back. Most of the lands were under Palco's control, and many wars had happened in the last 10 years. But since Palco had more rations and a large army, he could hold on without losing much. When Edward asked for a sorcerer from the sorcerer lord, the man saw it as his chance to gain more support and resources from this Storm King. He ordered one of his best men to take another 4 sorcerers with him to the Kingdom of Storms to help Edward. He would negotiate for more rations and other war resources from Edward for that help. That was why the arrogant sorcerers from the east could not help but be humble in front of this man who could change the war with only one word from his mouth. The leader, Linbo, bowed his head when he greeted Edward. Even the Shadowbinder from Ashay could not help but get surprised after seeing this. Ashay and Ut had many interactions. She knew for sure about the real attitude of the sorcerers of Ut. They were an arrogant bunch and would not bow down to anyone. But at the moment, she saw one of the most powerful ones bowing his head to Edward. She could not help but get more impressed by the Storm King in front of her. A man had gained respect. A man had come to listen to the man's request, said the faceless man as he nodded his head. Edward had gained their appreciation during the war against Bravos. Not to mention, Edward had earned their respect after his assassination failed. The faceless men promised not to hurt him. That was the reason why Edward was not afraid of Bravos's threat. Edward also had helped them to store many different faces from around the world. Due to their past deal, Edward wanted to gain protection for his family, so he had to do so. The faceless men were unpredictable, and he had to use this way to earn their appreciation and promise not to hurt his family if he wanted to sleep well at night. That was why Edward helped them collect many faces from places where they found it difficult to collect from the people living there. Although Bravos were where this faith started, they only cared about the price. The price Edward paid was much higher than what Bravos could afford to pay, especially after their fleet got destroyed and they began to lose their gold to feed the large population of the city. Even Abbey did not help them. Edward's fleet surrounded the whole 100 Isles of Bravos, leaving them with no way to buy even food. Lorith, which was the poorest of the free cities, due to the influence of Bravos, snatched the whole cake. As for the faceless men, Edward allowed them to travel around and did not prevent them from doing their job. Edward knew that some of the ships that he allowed to enter Bravos were just fake. They did not belong to the faceless men and carried food to sell to Bravos, but Edward decided to let them since he wanted to see the faceless men's response. They did not disappoint him, and all those that used the faceless men's name got killed in their sleep and did not leave the island. The ships got sent to Edward's fleet, though. Although that action created much tension between them and the cellar of Bravos, whose situation got worse, no one dared to do anything to the temple. No one wanted to incur the faceless men's anger. Edward provided them with faces from O'Shea, Yeti, etc. Plus, to maintain his relationship with the group, he would give them some gold every once in a while. Not to mention all that, but Edward was their best client who hired them a lot. That was the sweet Edward who did not want conflict. Although he did that, he also did use threat. He warned them that he would take all their clients and destroy their building if they tried to do something like hurting his families. He would chase them to the end of the earth and kill every faceless man till this faith died with him. Edward demonstrated his threat by killing one of the faceless men who got hired to kill one of Edward's men in Volantis. When Edward heard about his man's death, he searched every place that the faceless man could use to return to Volantis. Every ship got searched, and everyone that did not agree got killed. In the end, they were able to find the man who used the coin of the faceless men to return to Bravos. Edward tortured him so that the faceless men knew that he was not playing around. In the end, Edward flayed the man alive and used his skin to draw his sigil. After this accident, the faceless men did not try to retaliate since no one would pay them for doing so too. After that accident, both sides tried to fix their relationship. Edward did not want more of his men to die. Although the faceless men were not many, they were deadly. Edward did not wish to face those men head-on. He had his children to worry about as well. And since the faceless men did not want to escalate the situation since they only did their job, they came to Edward to discuss this matter. The faceless men would only kill when the price was there. One of those faceless men entered Edward's room with no one noticing. If Edward was not cautious all the time, he was afraid that he might fall dead under the faceless men's hands. The moment the man entered Edward's room, Edward put his sword on the man's neck. If he had made any wrong move, Edward would have killed him. The man does not have to worry. The man had earned the many faces God's protection, said the man with an expressionless face. He was not worried at all. It seemed that the faceless man was not afraid of death, or he knew that Edward would not kill him. Then why did you sneak into my room? Asked Edward as he put his sword aside. He knew that the faceless men would not go back on their words. They did not need to play tricks to kill him. If they targeted Edward's children, it would be enough to make Edward hesitate. Chapter 140. 3 Favors from the Faceless Men. The man came to deliver a message. The man will not target you and your children. The man will kill other men still, said the man with a calm tone. He expressed that they would not kill Edward or his children, but he would still kill the others if the price got paid. Although Edward wanted more than that, he knew that he could not change this group's mind. So unless he launched a full attack on their temple and destroyed the Black and White House in Bravos, they would still kill his men. Those men were deadly, and Edward wished not to have any conflict with that religion. All he tried to do was to protect his children. He thought that since the faceless men managed to kill one of his men in Volantis, what could prevent them from doing the same to his children? So although Edward was not happy with this agreement, he would save his children at least. Not many men could afford to pay the required price the faceless men would demand to kill Edward's men. Edward could go with that. His children were the top priority. I am fine with that, but you have to provide me with a client's name that asked for my men's death. Of course, I will compensate you. You know who pays the best, said Edward to the faceless man. Since he could not prevent his men's death, he would take revenge against those who tried to kill them instead. The man seemed to be in thought, and Edward did not interrupt him. He took a few seconds to think before looking at Edward for another few seconds before nodding his head. The man can do that, said the man with a calm tone. Edward had gained the recognition of their god after all, so it was all right to give in a little. Edward nodded his head in satisfaction after hearing the man's reply. He then thought of another matter and turned to the man again. Do you want to move your place? Asked Edward as he looked at the calm man in front of him. The man does not understand what the man says, said the man with a calm tone. Although Edward's words confused him, his expression did not change at all. You must have heard that I am building a new city. If you want to spread your faith in Westeros, you have your chance. I can build you a temple in the new city, said Edward to the man with a smile. He wanted to make the faceless men owe him. He would extort them in the future if he managed to do that. The man took some time to think of Edward's words. No one could not get tempted after hearing those words. Every faith wished that their religion could reach the end of the world. Even the calm faceless men wanted to do the same. They did not have any temple in this world except the Black and White House in Braavos. If they managed to get this opportunity, they would take it. Not to mention that the Kingdom of Storm was becoming the center of the world slowly, but they would have much wealth and many people. What does the man want? Asked the faceless man after staying silent for some time. He had thought about Edward's proposal and could not resist the temptation. 3 favors. That is all I want. I want your word, said Edward with a smile, but he was secretly laughing in his heart. Edward knew how to attract everyone to him. He knew what they wanted and how to use them. The man agrees, said the man before turning around and leaving a room without a second thought. He was silent that even the men standing outside did not notice anything. Edward wondered if he did not agree to their proposal at that moment. Would they ever really manage to kill his children? After that conversation, Edward sent his first request to the faceless men. He did not want them to participate in the war between Braavos and his kingdom. That was why Edward was not so worried about the Braavos' threats. He knew that the faceless men would not turn back on their words. And that takes us to this moment, right now, where the 4 religions stood in front of Edward. After 3 years of Edward's first request, the second one had finally come. Edward sent to the faceless men saying that if they could help him with the thing he wanted, Edward would regard it as they had completed their second favor. Edward nodded his head after seeing the attitude of the faceless man. He did not make the wrong choice back then. Although the many faces God's faith did not start long ago like the others, they were powerful. And with the wealth that Braavos had in the past, Edward was sure that they had vast knowledge. Edward wanted to use this knowledge at the moment. We greet the Storm King, said the Red Priestess, Kinvara. Although Edward did not do much to help this group as he did to the others, he had allowed them to spread their religion in his lands. That was the reason they came here that day, especially after Edward promised them to build a temple for the Lord of Light in his new city. Edward's actions would be the first in Westeros. No faith had managed to enter Westeros and spread because of the other 2 religions in Westeros. The Andals were fanatics who killed anyone that did not follow their religion. They had done so before they came to Westeros. The Andals already had a kingdom on the eastern shore of Essos before they came to Westeros. When they were expanding their territory, they used their religion to kill everyone who opposed them. That was the reason why Edward was not fond of this faith. Just look at what the High Sparrow did in King's Landing. He used that religion of his and gathered all those idiots around him. The man almost managed to take control of King's Landing. Since Edward wanted to kill that religion a little by little, he allowed any religion to exist in his lands. He first needed to weaken the Seven's influence and prepare the right climate for the other faiths to prosper and gather more followers. That would also allow his kingdom to flourish, especially after he allowed everyone to learn. Edward had started his plans to distribute the knowledge to the citizens of his kingdom long ago. Edward's plan was going smoothly until this moment and had produced many results that Edward was aiming for that allowed the kingdom to flourish more and more. We will get to this matter later. Chapter 141, The Blood Rituals. Of course, Edward met disagreement from the lords for doing something like that. Most of them were not even believers and just followed the 7 in name only, but they came here to oppose him. Of course, Edward used his favorite ways of carrot and stick tactics to convince them. He asked them if the Septons following the 7 decided to rally everyone against them, what would happen to their castles? He expressed his points to make them understand why he did something like that. Although they agreed to what Edward said, they still found it difficult to allow other faiths in their lands. At that time, Edward used his sword to convince them. He issued a rule that everyone must follow in his kingdom, and they did not dare to say anything more. Plus, Edward really liked the other religions more than the seven. The old god's faith was a calm one that was more spiritual than the seven. Just look at the god's wood that he set up in the new city. When Edward would have a lot on his mind, he would go there to relax. Although the new temple for the many faces god was a little creepy, you could find silence there. As for the temple for the Lord of Light, it was a little like the September. A little noisy, but Edward already had a good impression of the Lord of Light. He knew about him from the show and books. He might be the most powerful god among the gods. Edward wanted half of his kingdom to at least follow the Lord of Light. Edward nodded his head to the priestess to show that he acknowledged her greeting. Edward then turned to everyone and spoke. "I am grateful to all of you for coming here today. Now, follow me," said Edward as he stood up from his throne. Of course, he would not discuss such crucial matters in the throne room. Edward kept all the significant research in his secret room. Many guards stood in front of that room, not to mention the trap's mechanisms. This room contained many valuable things, and Edward had to guard it well. After they arrived in front of the room, Edward asked them to wait for a moment. He would like to deactivate the traps, but he did not allow anyone to see the right way to do the same. After the soldiers guarding the room stood aside and opened a path for Edward, Edward opened the door and went inside directly. He spent about 10 minutes in the room, only to deactivate the traps. After he finished, he came out and asked the rest to follow him. When the group entered the room that looked like a dungeon, they became a little cautious. They did not know why Edward took them here. But after some time walking inside, they saw another large room. Books, tubes, and other things filled the room. What got the group's attention and surprise was the formations drawn around the room. They could see the effects of blood magic's trials around the room. Yet, that was Edward's secret. He had been trying to learn these things all this time, but it seemed he needed some kind of rituals that would prepare his body for this magic. If he did not go with those rituals, he would not have the ability to practice this kind of magic. The ones Edward found and intended to let the group help him with them could do many things. So plus hiding him from the three-eyed raven, those rituals would make him able to practice magic and sorcery in 10 years. Although he would not have the ability to do that during the relevant events, it might help him in his journey that he intended to make after becoming the king. Hint. Edward and the others would not learn magic unless later. Maybe during the fight against the Night King, but that would not affect the Night King much. The man did not even care about the dragon fire, so don't mention magic as pitiful as this magic. They could use it on his army, though. We will get to that later. I asked for everyone here because I wanted your help with these rituals. I was reading books from the old time and came up to this one. If you can help me, I will reward every one of you greatly," said Edward as he showed them the rituals without any words to describe their use. He only showed them the materials and the draws. When the group heard his words, everyone came forward to pick up the papers. The descriptions of the rituals were on those papers. When they started to read about the materials required and the kind of sorcery needed to perform those rituals, their faces changed at once. They did not even hear about those things at all. As for those who heard about these kinds of ingredients, knew that those things did not exist anymore. Even the sorcerer from Yurti and the Shadowbinder from Ashe did not know what to say, although they held most of the knowledge. They did not know what kind of rituals Edward intended to perform or how dangerous it was. According to the old scriptures in their hands, those materials were not for anything but good. The only ones who used those materials were the ancient sorcerers and warlocks who used them for much bloody witchcraft. Edward knew why they behaved like that. After reading about the myths and legends existing in the past, he figured many things that were impossible had happened already in the past. And if Edward was to believe those things, then those materials were used by the demons and dragon lords from the ancient Ashe. Those things might be the reason that the Shadowlands became like that, since such rituals were too dangerous. But Edward needed something like that as it would help him a lot in the future, if not him, then his children. Although he wanted to perform that kind of ritual, he knew that it might be impossible. The benefits of such dark and blood rituals are many that made Edward dazed after reading them. The matter of hiding his presence from the eyes of the world, making him able to use magic, and turning his blood into fire that would make him a dragon lord were just small things. These rituals might be the only reason that gave the old emperors of the Dawn Empire the ability to live for thousands or hundreds of years. Chapter 142, Finding a Solution. Edward really wanted to perform those rituals, but he knew it was impossible. Not only because of the materials and sorcery, but those rituals required the heart of his daughter. Not only that, but he had to be the one who took her heart himself too. Yet, I told you they were bloody. Although Edward thought of himself as a madman and a cruel person, his madness and cruelty would vanish without a trace when he treated his children. Edward, who had no ambition to be the king from the start, had changed his mind and decided to be the one and only king for his children's sake. Edward only wanted to play the game with the others, but his ambition turned slightly higher after his children's birth. The problem did not only stop at that, as his children must go through them, as well, if they wanted the power. Although he raised his children with all his heart, he did not discard the possibility that one of his sons or their descendants might discard everything for power. Edward did not want something like that to happen, so he threw away the thought of performing these rituals. He would be happy with a simplified version that did not require this kind of sacrifice. Edward also did not care about the pain he would have to endure himself instead of his children in order to perform those rituals. He did not care about time, as well, since he had about 7 to 8 years before the show's events would start. After reading everything on the papers, the group looked at each other in the eyes and shook their heads. There was no way they could do something like that. Although they wanted to help Edward as they owed him a lot, the thing Edward asked for had exceeded their ability. "I apologize, King Edward, but it seemed that we could not help you with something like that," said the Red Priestess, Kinvara. Disappointment covered her eyes. If the things that Edward wanted their help with were these rituals, they would not have the ability to help him, and hence their reward of getting a temple in the city would disappear as well. The rest followed Kinvara's words and nodded their heads. Even the emotionless, faceless man shook his head as he knew there was no chance they could do something like that. The sorcerer and the Shadowbinder were in the same situation. Even if they had more knowledge than the rest, they could not do something like that. "Of course, I knew you would not be able to do that. I needed your help in simplifying these rituals in order to use familiar materials and suitable sacrifices. Take all the time you need to do so, but I hope to get it done in 2 years at most," said Edward as he looked at the group. Even if they said they could perform the rituals, Edward would not believe what they said. The world had changed a lot since the Dawn Age, and there was no chance of finding those materials again. Although Edward had many books from the Citadel and the information gathered in many books about the sorcery in Ashay and Yeti, he did not have the required experience. All he knew was only some words on papers that could not help him much. But those groups of people had gone through a lot and had more knowledge than Edward, especially in that regard. That was the reason why Edward gathered this group from famous locations around the world. "Can you do that?" asked Edward as he got a little anxious after not hearing any response from the group. He was afraid that there was really no way of simplifying those rituals, and his dream would fly away. If he could not solve this problem, he would, at least, kill Brandon Stark to avoid the Stark's suspicions in the future. As for the current three-eyed raven, he could go to hell. No one would believe him even if he barked. But to Edward's surprise, the Shadowbinder, Maritha, smiled after hearing his question. It seemed she knew something as she smiled and spoke. "I can't promise that it will work, but I think we can do it. The effects would decrease a lot, though. I hope you would not mind," said Maritha as she looked at Edward in the eyes and smiled. If she managed to complete this mission, Ashay's debt to Edward would go way down. That is why she had to succeed. "I think we could find a way," said the sorcerer as he nodded his head as well. The resources they could get from Edward were way critical, and he could not fail his lord. The other two nodded as well since they thought they would have a chance if they cooperated with the other 4 groups. Edward smiled and nodded his head after hearing those words. He hoped that they would succeed. Edward was not anxious at all that those groups would steal the information because of multiple reasons. The first was an effect of those rituals. The basic benefit that would not disappear even after simplifying these rituals was the erasing of the memory of everyone who knew about those rituals except the one who would go through them. That was why Edward was not worried that the group would take the knowledge with them back after they succeeded. If they failed, there was nothing to care about since they would not take them back with them. The other reason was the source of those rituals. Edward spent 3 years gathering this information about those rituals. The books from the Citadel only had a part of these rituals. The other part was from the books and the details his men got for him. There was almost no chance for everyone to get the information about those rituals back unless they went around the world and gathered them piece by piece the same way Edward did. After Edward read those books, he took his men to the citadel and supervised the process of burning those books from the citadel. He was the only one who held a copy of those books at the moment. It took the group 2 fucking years in order to find a suitable formula for the simplified version of the rituals. Edward was at the end of his wits for those 2 years, as his future actions would depend on the results coming from this group. But his wait did not go to waste, and the group did not disappoint him as they came up with a simplified version. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143, Bran's Idol. After they handed the results to Edward, Edward started to read them carefully. Although some benefits were long gone and the others' effects had decreased, at least a few things he wanted were still there. Although the group still did not know what this formula they came up with was for, since Edward did not hand them all the required information, they managed to replace the ancient ingredients with ones that existed at the moment. These rituals did not get tested yet, but Edward did not have time for testing them. He had to take the risk. He put up a plan to kill every competitor that might cause harm to his children the moment the rituals failed. You might say that this situation is a bit forced, but I think that is how dark and blood magic was done in the past and in that world. I knew some of you might say that Edward was not acting rationally by using something like that. He might have got himself killed in the process, but think of it from another perspective. Would he allow anyone to have this power? So for this power, Edward decided to gamble it all. If he managed to succeed, he would use magic in the future one, but as he was about to finish reading the results and order the preparation of everything required, he found the sacrifice required for this ritual. He could not help but scream in shock. It was something that he had never prepared to and could not set up his mind to do something like that. He thought that after the simplification, this problem would disappear as well. That matter made him postpone the rituals for another year until an accident happened, and he steeled his mind to go with it. After going through those rituals, he did not die. Although he put a chance that death might happen and he steeled his heart, he still could not help but feel joy after seeing that he was alive. Side effects came up after that, though. The condition, side effects, the process of the rituals, and the results will come up later. 3. Edward, who remembered all those things that happened to him in the past, could not help but smile, especially after seeing the main reason, the small child standing in front of him. Although Bran made him suffer a lot in the past few years, all this suffering would come up with more benefits in the near future. Due to this suffering, Edward was sure that his dynasty would rule for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Edward did not know whether he should thank the child in front of him or hate him because of the suffering he had to endure. Edward could only sigh after remembering all that and having those childish thoughts. He was not a child anymore and could not think like that. He would turn into a 40-year-old man in just a few years, so he had to respect his old age. Not to mention his age, but his first grandson was about to come to this world and see the light in the next 5 months, so Edward had to act like a grandfather and not behave like a child anymore. It would be an insult if he still behaved as he did in the past. That was why Edward had changed his personality over the past 15 years. He was a lot calmer and collected compared to before. His rush and reckless actions were no more. Although his cruelty was still there, he found that he was an idiot for torturing all those men in the open back then. Could not he do something like that in the dark? Why did he have to tell the world that he tortured those men? Yes, it was good for destroying the enemy's morale. But it might backfire in his face if the enemy used this chance to convince his army that this would be their end if they did not fight seriously. It was good that Edward did not fight someone like Tywin using these tactics. Edward did not stay long in his days, as he did not anyone to doubt him. Brandon would fall from the tower in the next month and a half when Robert and his group reached Winterfell, and Edward did not have the time to entertain the Starks at that time. Plus, he wanted them to blame Tyrion, as Edward had the intention to save him and look like a hero at that time. Plus, Edward wanted to use that chance to get rid of Petyr Baelish and Lysa Arryn. So he looked down into the boy's eyes and spoke. "How do you feel, little Brandon?" Edward asked with a smile as he put his hands on Bran's shoulder. "I feel great, Uncle Edward," said the little boy with a smile. Bran's dream was to become a knight at the same age as Edward. He wanted his name to spread all over Westeros, especially after his father told him about Edward's adventures at his young age. He knew that the man who defeated the well-known Arthur Dayne, the bold Barristan Selmy, and the previous Prince Rhaegar was the uncle standing in front of him. That was why Bran's eyes were like stars at the moment when he looked at Edward. Haha, good. I heard you wanted to become a knight, right? Well, work hard. You are your father's son, after all. I am sure you will be as splendid as him. You will become a knight that all Westeros heard his name in the future. If you want to visit me in the Kingdom of Storms or work there, you could always come to me anytime," said Edward with a smile after seeing the look of adoration in Bran's eyes. Edward started spitting lies everywhere. The author always wondered how that retard sleep at night one is for Edward. He wondered how Bran would look at him in the future when he could not see anything about Edward. Would he look suspicious or confused at that time? Edward could not wait to see that. "I will become a knight as Uncle Edward. I will defeat you in the future and take the title of the strongest knight in Westeros," shouted the young boy with a smile as he looked at Edward. He was happy to receive such praise from his idol. He had the ambition to defeat Edward, but Edward did not care about such a title. What could you do if you were the strongest, but alone while facing 50 or 100 men? Would that title help you then? The soldiers would have killed and raped your corpse before you could raise your sword. It is how a million ants could take down an elephant. 6. Chapter 144, Abusing Jon. Edward smiled and moved to greet the young boy beside Bran. The only Stark whose fate did not count much? The one who did not do anything in his life that could enter history. He died in the end like a sheep in a game played by Ramsay Bolton. Edward did not have a clue why things were that different with this boy. He was nothing like his brothers and sisters. Just look at his brother Robb. Although his end was so brutal, he became the first king in the North after so long, at least. The North did not see a king since King Tormund Stark bent the knee. That alone counted for a lot in Edward's eyes. Although it was not Robb's plan and Greatjon Umber was the one who suggested it, he was a king, at least. He led his men south and managed to defeat the old fox, Tywin Lannister, in more than one battle and captured Tywin's son. He had a glorious life before dying. As for Sansa, she turned into a badass queen in the end. Not only did she manage to fix all the shit things that happened to her in King's Landing and on Ramsay Bolton's hands, but she also killed most of her enemies and became the sole winner in the North. She killed the author's favorite character, Petyr Baelish, just like that. Edward knew that she would become an great queen after she had ascended the throne of the North. As for Arya, this little one did not need much description. The young girl trained with the Faceless Men and avenged her family that died in the Red Wedding. But her revenge was the most supreme. Everyone is calling Edward a mad and cruel one because he killed Jon Connington and his family in that way. But look at the phrase, Arya did not just kill the whole family with fucking poison, but she killed Walder Frey's sons and cooked them in a pie and made the old Frey eat his own sons. Some of you might say that she was right because she was avenging her family, but Edward was hiding all his hate for Jon and Rhaegar for so long. And the first chance that he found to release his anger and frustration, Edward did not hesitate to take it. 3. As for Brandon, Edward did not need to mention the three-eyed raven and his powers. Bran had already caused Edward much pain just in order to hide himself from Bran. As for the last member of the Starks, Jon fucking Snow, the Wild Wolf, and the new king in the North who killed the mother of dragons, Edward could take ages to describe him. But the little one in front of him was the only nobody in the Stark. Well, Edward could not exclude that things might change a lot this time and that this brat might have a future that was much different than the real timeline, so he would also build a good relationship with the young Stark wolf. "Little Rickon, you grew up a lot," said Edward as he used his hand to play with Rickon's hair. Rickon was the youngest in the Starks, and Edward did not see him when he was here the last time. The small boy only saw the light and came to this world in the span of the 5 years that Edward spent away from the North. The little brat smiled after hearing Edward's words. He could not understand much and did not know who the man standing in front of him was, so he could only smile. After greeting the rest of the Stark, Edward did not want to do the same to Jon, just yet, and turned his eyes to Ned. He wanted to visit the crypt to see Lyanna's statue. Edward would always do so after arriving at Winterfell. He would ask Ned to take him to the crypt the first thing after he came to Winterfell. Although some of you might say that he was imitating Robert by doing something like that, Edward did not care. Lyanna was his friend, after all. "Let's go to the crypt, Ned," said Edward as he looked at Ned, who nodded his head and told his steward and Catelyn to take care of the rest. They had to take care of Edward's children and take them to their rooms to rest. "Don't send little John away. I wanted him to come with us," said Edward as he saw that Ned was about to send everyone away. Edward would take Jon Snow to Storm's this with him this time. He would force Ned if he had to do something like that. Edward did not want Jon's personality to progress that far on the wall. He did not want him to develop into a king's material, or Edward would have to kill him since Edward would not allow such a threat to continue to live. Jon had more claim to the throne than Daenerys and Rhaenys since he was Rhaegar's son. Although Rhaenys was Rhaegar's daughter as well, she was a girl. That was why Edward intended to take Jon under his wing and shape him the way he wanted. Edward did not want to kill the last remaining thing of Lyanna. He had already caused her death and did not want to break the promise that he made to her back then. Although Edward made the promise, if he saw that Jon turned into a threat to his ambitions or his son's future, Edward would not hesitate to eliminate him. Lucky for him, Jon was weak and needed a warm family at the moment. Due to Edward's action this time, Jon came to this world months earlier than Robb, which made it look like Ned had a relationship with another woman before sleeping even with Catelyn. That made the already jealous Catelyn, who was angry for losing her first love, Brandon Stark, suppress the young Jon to a pitiful degree. The woman did not leave him even a small chance to take his breath before putting him down again and again. While she did all that, Ned only stood there and did nothing to stop her. Although he thought that what Catelyn did was wrong, he did not say a word. Ned thought that he protected Jon by doing nothing just like that. But in reality, he was hurting him more and more. Although Ned thought that by exposing Jon to this and letting his wife do something like that, Jon would not think of taking back the Iron Throne from Robert with such low self-esteem, Ned was way wrong in his thinking. In Edward's eyes, Ned was preparing Jon to become a great king by doing that. Who is better to rule a kingdom as the king other than the man who has no thought of becoming one? 4. Chapter 145, Female Knight. That was why Ned and Catelyn's faces changed after hearing Edward's words, for different reasons, of course. Catelyn did not know why the well-known and the most powerful man in Westeros, the Storm King, would care about someone as insignificant as Ned's bastard. She did not want Jon to have such connections in the future that might affect her son. She could not wait for him to disappear from her and her son's lives. That was why Catelyn could not wait to get rid of him and send him to the wall. She was ecstatic after hearing that he would go to the wall by himself. As for Ned, he remembered Edward's words from last time. Edward had told him that he would take Jon with him once he turned 15. Edward did not like how Catelyn treated Jon and had fought with Ned multiple times because of that. Edward told Ned that he would be breaking his promise to Lyanna by leaving Jon in Ned's care. Since Ned had the right to hold Jon in Winterfell during his childhood as Ned introduced him as his bastard, Ned kept refusing Edward's offers of taking Jon to Storm's Land and taking care of him with Edward's sons. So Edward told him that he would come when Jon came out of age and take with him to his kingdom, whether Ned agreed or not on something like that. That was one of the two reasons why Edward took 5 years this time to return to Winterfell, unlike the other visits. Ned could not say anything this time as he saw with his own eyes how Jon's life became miserable day after day. He wondered if he agreed to Edward's suggestion back then and allowed Jon to go with him, would the situation have escalated to this degree? Ned felt a little guilty the more he saw Jon in that state, but Ned only promised Lyanna to protect him and take him away from Robert's eyes. And that was what he did for the past 15 years. No one doubted that Jon was Lyanna and Rhaegar's son. Ned signaled Catelyn to move on and take care of the rest while he looked at Jon. Catelyn, who was still angry, could not say anything, especially after hearing Edward's order. Jon shifted his eyes between Ned and Edward and did not know what to say. Although Catelyn made things difficult for him, the little boy was still thankful to have his brothers and sisters. He did not know, as well, why someone on the top of the pyramid as Edward would care about a bastard like him. Edward would always greet him and treat him the same way he did to the other Starks, if not more. Jon always felt that Edward took special care of him. That was why Jon was so grateful and wished to get closer to Edward. "Follow us, Jon," said Ned to the confused Jon without saying anything more. Ned was always like that. He did not like to speak much nor express much. "Do you want me to follow you, Your Grace?" asked a female voice from behind the group when she saw that Edward would enter the crypt. Surprise filled everyone's eyes since they could not see her face earlier since she was wearing her helmet. But her voice was definitely a female's voice. That was why everyone's surprise was like that, especially after seeing what she was wearing. The female knight wore the black and gold armor, representing the king's guard working under King Edward I. They could not believe that. Even the Stark children stopped in their tracks after hearing her voice. The Starks and the Mormonts were the most familiar with situations like that where they had strong females, but it did not come close to this degree. Although everyone had heard about Lyanna Stark's tale and the Mormonts, theirs did not get them close to this moment. A female knight as a king's guard was unheard of in Westeros. Although Stormsland turned into a free space where females could enter the army, no one was noteworthy to get Edward's attention, not to mention promoting them to knight. Yet, that female was a knight since Edward made this rule himself. No one could become one of Edward's king's guards if he was not a knight. During the last 15 years, only 3 females were worthy enough to get Edward's attention. The number of females that entered the armies was in hundreds, but no one was amazing enough to reach high. The first one of the 3 was Alysanna Stone. She was a bastard fathered by one of Edward's friends, Robin Hood, who acted as a playboy and fucked one of the Smaugfolks who gave birth to Alysanna. Lucky for that bastard that his wife was tolerable enough and did not turn his life into hell. As for Alysanna, although she was a bastard, she had a good figure and was very good with the sword. She was one of Edward's trusted ones. That was the reason why Edward had sent her to the most significant task suitable for her. The girl was older than Edward's first son by 4 years. Edward only found out when Robin's wife had come to complain to him. Edward had built a good relationship with his friends and his families and did not behave like the typical king who would push everyone away and order them to treat him like he was the god. In fact, after Edward would finish his duties in the Storm Keep, he did not mind going to one of the towers to spend some time with his friends. Back to Alysanna, Edward knew that he could not send a male knight to guard Daenerys, or he would risk it if that man fell in love with Daenerys like everyone else. Although he sent Alysanna to Daenerys, Edward was worried that Daenerys might change her preferences this time and make Alysanna fall for her. If something like that happened, it would be disastrous. Edward would be speechless if that happened. That was the reason why Edward only gave her one instruction, which was to protect Daenerys. If nothing happened in the future and Alysanna did not fall for Daenerys, Edward would move up with his plans and order her to kill Daenerys after Edward got done with her too. Chapter 146, Corinna Swan and Brienne of Tarth. In Edward's eyes, everyone had his uses, even his children and his friends. After they did what Edward wanted, there was no more reason to keep them alive then. Of course, the second part was applicable for the rest, not his children. As for his friends, as long as they did not cause harm to him or his children, Edward did not mind them and would treat them well. As for children, Edward only used them in forming alliances. So although 2 of them did not want to marry, Edward had forced them. He told them that they could do whatever they wanted, but only after his plans produced results. By that time, he would be the king and the one who controlled all Westeros and the eastern part of Essos, so his children could do whatever they wanted in their father's world. After convincing them, his children agreed, although they still were not happy with Edward's decision. They knew that their father only married their mother because he loved her, as they knew that House Dane had betrayed their father during the rebellion and allied themselves with the Martells and the fallen prince, Rhaegar. Even if they did not betray their father, House Dane's forces would not help their father a lot. In their eyes, House Dane was the only one that benefited from that relationship. That was why they did not want their father to choose who they could marry. As for Alysanna, Edward planned to keep her by his side. As long as she did not do anything that betrayed his trust, Edward would let her live. The second that she fell in love with Daenerys, Edward would consider her as a wild card that needed to die. He would not kill her at once, though. Would not it be better to leave her by Daenerys' side so that she could say good words about Edward? Edward always treated her well and even sent her to protect Daenerys. That was enough to make her put some good words about Edward. That would help Edward with the trap network he was building for Daenerys and her dragons. No one knew how to play with words more than Edward, and he was sure that he had the ability to wrap Daenerys around his fingers and kill her after they defeated the Night King. The second female knight was Corinna Swan. She was a splendid one that got Edward's trust after years of hard work. Due to her dedication, Edward had assigned her as a squire to his right-hand man, John Clyn. Although Clyn did not like it at first, since the idea of a female knight was a little extreme for every lord, even for Edward's close men, he still took her in and trained her to the best he could. He knew that his king would not do something unnecessary, and he must have seen something in that girl to give him this order. It did not even take 2 years before Clyn sang praises of her and bragged in front of the others about the girl's dedication. Clint was a serious man who admired hard work, and Corinna was the right one who had what Clint wanted. That was why he got more and more pleased with Corinna after training her all that time. Every time that he kicked her down, Corinna would stand up again and raise her sword. Due to this, Clint and Corinna got closer and closer. Edward could swear that if Corinna was not much younger than Clint would have taken her as his mistress. That relationship nearly caused Clint to lose his marriage. Clint's wife, Jean Rowan, who Clint married after the rebellion, went to Edward and complained a lot about that. Even Clint's 3 sons, Loras, Rickon, and Eddard, had come to Edward considering this problem. They did not want to see their respected father behaving like that. After dealing with all that, Edward decided to knight the young Corinna, who was already 19. Corinna, who became a knight at such a young age, believed that she could join the king's guard. The problem was that Corinna had to defeat one of the existing ones. Although Corinna was a promising knight, compared to Edward's men, she was a bit lacking. That was why until this moment, she did not manage to become a king's guard. Although Corinna had failed terribly in her dream of becoming a king's guard, she did not give up. She continued to train, and her performance got better and better. Edward estimated that she might enter the king's guard in 3 years if she continued to improve like that. Edward had set up another guard unit called Princess Guard. Every prince and princess had this unit since Edward had to ensure their safety. Those men would heed every request their prince ordered. But they could only answer to 2 men, the prince who they were supposed to protect, and the king, with the king as the top priority. That was the reason why the brat, William, could not travel outside Westeros as he wanted. The Princess Guard would prevent him and take him to Storm's Eye every time he tried something like that. Corinna, who failed to achieve her dreams of becoming one of Edward's King's Guard, decided to train herself among Princess Teresa's Princess Guard. Not only did she join the Princess Guard, but with her own ability, Corinna managed to become the captain. That was why Edward could let his first daughter, Teresa, who appeared as an angel in front of the others and a demon when she was alone with him, travel with a calm heart. As for his second daughter, Jasmine, Edward would not let her leave his eyes. The girl was still 9 at the moment. Not only was she this young, but she had experienced terrible accidents when she was only 3 that caused her trauma. Although she recovered a lot, the little girl would get scared quite easily and would not leave Edward's side for long. I knew the name Jasmine is a little out of place, especially in the medieval era like Westeros, but I really liked that name, so go with it, Cap. For the 3rd female knight that Corinna was jealous of was, of course, the one and only Brienne of fucking Tarth. Edward was afraid that he fucked the timeline and Brienne would not get born in this world, or she might have a different personality, but his worries were gone the moment he heard about the girl. Although she did not suffer a lot compared to the other timeline since Edward allowed the females to hold their swords, she still got bullied by the other girls and boys. Brienne was so tall and had a large body frame compared to the other children in her age. That made it difficult for anyone to accept her as a friend or as a wife. Everyone, who Brienne got betrothed to, would annul the relationship after seeing her, which made her and her father frustrated too. Chapter 147 The Amazing Brienne. Although Lord Tarth loved his daughter a lot and held her dearly to his heart, the girl would still get looked down on by others, which made him frustrated that he even offered her to the other lord's sons in every meeting. That made the little Brienne more frustrated that she hated her shape till she turned 12. At that time, the news about the new knight, Corinna Swan, reached Tarth. With all the hype that Edward created to promote Corinna, every female saw her as an idol and a far-fetched goal that they could only look up to but not ever reach, except one young lady. After hearing about Corinna and how she entered the court and got appointed by Edward himself as one of the Princess Teresa's Princess Guard, Brienne started asking her father to gather as much new information about the female knight as he could. After her father told her everything he knew and the things his friends knew as well, Brienne's eyes turned into stars. She put a goal at that moment in front of her and worked hard for it. She wanted to surpass the first female knight in Westeros and be the first knight that entered Edward's King's Guard. Although she held a sword before, since it was the only thing that consoled her after she got rejected, she only swung the sword without as a form of consolation. After that day, Brienne trained every day since then seriously and did not even bother to meet any new fiancé her father brought to meet her. For 2 years, she did not know anything except her sword and her food. Sometimes, she did not bother to return to her family keep and would stay at the training field, where she would sleep on the ground before training again in the morning. When she was 14, and with the help of her large body's frame and the hard work in the past 2 years, Brienne participated in her first tourney in the capital, Storm's Eye. Although she did not win, her results surprised everyone, except the king, who kept an eye on her since she came to this world. Edward would not miss such a gem and let her waste her efforts on the unworthy. Edward did not contact the girl for this long because he wanted Brienne to develop her passion by herself. Part of Brienne's power, which made her that strong, was her passion for knighthood. Without it, the girl would lose a lot and would not turn into the badass one that Edward always admired during the series. After that tourney, Edward made a decision that surprised everyone in the kingdom, especially after knowing Edward's personality true enough. Although Edward was rash and cruel in the past, his personality had experienced many changes after the rebellion. Edward turned into the wise and collected king that everyone respected after ruling for a few years. Although Edward was still cruel when it came to corruption and criminals, the lords did not fear him as they did before. They started admiring him more and more instead, especially since Edward did not break his promise he made long ago to the houses in Storm's Land and treated every house living in his realm as a branch family of the Baratheons. The house's wealth continued to grow, especially after Edward took over most of the free cities in Essos and allowed them to trade freely in the cities without making them pay taxes. The decision that Edward made that shook everyone was appointing Brienne of fucking Tarth as his squire. Although Corinna was the best example that females could become splendid knights, there weren't many. Plus, even with how much amazing Corinna was, Edward only sent her to be a squire of his friend, Clyn. Yet, Edward as the king took a few squires and wards in the past, but they were not many. If you removed his sons from the group, the others could get counted on one hand. That was why Edward choosing Brienne to be his squire raised many voices, especially since many lords wanted their sons to become Edward's squires. The most surprised man in all this situation was none other than Selwyn Tarth, Brienne Tarth. He did not expect such a thing to happen. Although he went along with Brienne's wishes and allowed her to follow her dream by holding the sword, he did not expect her to be successful, that the king would take her as his squire himself. As he thought that with how many females entered the armies and only one managing to become a knight, his daughter did not have much of a chance. The females enrolled in the armies were many which could get counted in hundreds if not thousands, but only one became a knight, after all, that time, so everyone could understand the surprise of Lord Tarth and the others when Brienne got chosen by the king. That meant that Edward saw her potential and believed that she could surpass Lady Corinna. Although Lady Corinna could not enter Edward's King's Guard, she was among the best of the best if she could become the Princess Guard commander of Princess Teresa. Edward's move meant that Brienne would have the ability to enter the King's Guard, making her one of the most powerful in the whole kingdom. Not only that, but being the squire of the king would raise her status among all the noble houses. House Tarth would benefit from this as well, since Edward promised to reward each house that could raise up a suitable King's Guard with many benefits as rewards for the houses of his King's Guard. The reason for that was that Edward had thought that those men might die protecting him and not the land. Those men had to be rewarded by him and not the taxes that he took from the small folks. And since Edward was generous and had a lot of gold that he earned throughout the years and the treasures he obtained from the free cities, Edward's reward was usually high. The second most surprised one after hearing Edward's decision was none other than the kingdom's first female knight, Corinna Swan. Although Alicina was close to Edward and an excellent sword dancer, she did not get the chance to get promoted to knight. Edward had sent her to deaneries when she was just 16 years old. As for Corinna, who got all the attention back then, she started to see Brienne as her rival. Corinna's dream was to enter Edward's King's Guard and become the first to do so, but her plans got interrupted by the appearance of Brienne. That was why the two's relationship did not progress at all. In fact, they did not get along. Chapter 148, Distributing the Knowledge. Although Brienne saw Corinna as an idol and the star that made her take her first step in this path, she did not plan to concede in defeat. On the contrary, since Edward was the first worthy lord and king to appreciate Brienne's talents and did not put her down like the rest of the lords, Brienne made an oath to protect him and prove to Edward that his choice was in its place. She would prove herself to the others and tell them how they had missed their chance. After getting chosen by Edward as his squire, Brienne started following Edward left and right, especially in the training field where Edward would teach her personally. Although Brienne knew that Edward was probably the strongest man in the kingdom and the best swordsman, especially after he killed Rhaegar in single combat without getting injured, she was still surprised by his level when he taught her how to fight correctly with his sword. Although Edward was older at that point in time, He was not like his brother, Robert, who got fat and did not train well during the peaceful years after the Greyjoys' rebellion. So Edward, who was still at the beginning of his 30s, was at his prime instead. That was why Brienne got amazed time after time. Edward's news was scarce since Edward did not fight personally for more than 10 years after the rebellion. Many started to forget about the legends that he created back then. But Brienne could see that all of them were true. The man standing in front of her was the man who defeated both Arthur Dayne and Barristan Selmy, the most famous kingsguards in this era. He was the one that ended an entire dynasty by killing its crowned prince, Rhaegar Targaryen I. Although Brienne saw that her mission was getting harder and harder after seeing Edward like that, since it meant that Edward was much stronger than her, which, in return, indicated that she was not suitable to be a kingsguard yet, she was overjoyed as well. Edward's performance meant that she could learn a lot from him. Plus, that action also suggested that Edward was still in his prime and could rule for more years. Edward's position in the heart of everyone living in the kingdom was like a god. After all those years of disastrous submission under the Targaryens' hands, Storm's land could finally feel free again. And under the hands of a wise king like Edward, the lives of the people continued to improve. Especially the young generation and the Smaugfolks, they were the ones that worshipped Edward the most. The younger generation grew hearing the tales of Edward's brilliance in both military and political affairs. They heard about how he united the Kingdom of Storms and defeated the seasoned commander, Randyll Tarly, in the Reach. They sang songs about how he killed the mighty prince, Rhaegar Targaryen, in single combat in minutes and without getting injured at all. Although they also heard about Edward's cruelty and his actions against those who opposed him, especially the families that betrayed him, they did not care and thought that he was dominating instead. Those who did not experience such acts with their own eyes would not think much of it and would not know how horrifying such scenes were. Unless you are as honorable as Ned, you would not think much of it. One is for the Smaugfolks, they did not care about his achievements during the rebellion at all. They did not care if he was a titan or a giant. Yet, they sang about it and admired him from afar, but that was it. If they did not get any benefits from the king that made their lives easier, they could turn against the king at any moment because of something idiotic like the religion of the Seven. That was the thought process of the Smaugfolks. But Edward's action changed most of that, or at least most of it. Not only did Edward make things easier for them by paving the cement roads, building new towns and castles, and starting new projects where he would hire more Smaugfolks, but he also let them learn as well. Edward had commenced his plans to distribute the basic knowledge among the Smaugfolks. Edward's goals for doing something like that were three ones. First, Edward wanted to groom up new talents for his kingdom. The kingdom could not just depend on the nobles' blood that actually weakened it by keeping everything for themselves, their greed for power and wealth, and ambitions. Of course, he would not go against the nobility as it was a part of the kingdom. Removing the nobles' titles and changing everyone into ordinary citizens in the kingdom would be a far-fetched goal for a society that had lived in such a situation for thousands of years since the arrival of the first men to Westeros. But enabling the commoners to take high positions little by little would create a new faction that his sons and descendants could depend on if they had a problem with the nobles. Those two factions would move against each other throughout the years, putting each other into check 5 seconds. Edward wanted to grow loyalty towards the kingdom, not because of benefits only. In Edward's eyes, the Northerners were the only ones who had a complete loyalty towards the North and would fight against any Southern invader who came to fight them on their turf. Although they were not entirely loyal to the Starks, as some of them had a hidden agenda like the Boltons and the Umbers, at least they would fight together against any Southern invader too. Edward asked the singers and musicians to compose new songs about the new kingdom. He wanted songs that inspired the Smaugfolks' loyalty towards their kingdom, so they could defend it with all they got. It was the same way the countries in the modern world used to raise the nationality flag. If you educated everyone that this place was their land from their young age, they would grow thinking that it was their land and would defend it. That was Edward's plan to raise such loyalty, but this plan needed one thing: knowledge. The Smaugfolks had to learn how to read and write at the very least. They had to do their assignments, which were mainly about reading and writing those songs. Doing that made the young generation of Smaugfolks think of the Kingdom of Storms as their everything, especially with the easy life they got in the past 16 years. Third, Edward wanted to improve the living conditions of the Smaugfolks, and he saw the basic knowledge like reading, writing, and calculation. And Edward's plans proved that he was right, day after day, and the Smaugfolks of the other kingdoms started to despise the Meisters in the Citadel. After dealing with the learned folks from the Kingdom of Storms, The others rose to think how their lives were miserable compared to them. 1. Chapter 149, Killing Cal Morro. Edward's actions created more problems for the other kingdoms. These problems were significant enough that Lord Arryn took notice of it and made him decided to come and see Edward after this problem. He wanted to find a way to solve this problem efficiently. The small folks in King's Landing started showing signs of rebellion under the guide of the religion of the Seven. Although it did not escalate to the degree where the small folks would attack the king and his family like what happened in the show during Joffrey's rule, they still attacked some of the Gold Cloaks. Although Edward had cut his ties with the Iron Thrones and wanted to refuse to help, especially after all the problems that Robert, Tywin, and Cersei caused him after the rebellion to take their revenge, Edward could not say no to his foster father. He could help him and give him some guidance, at least. The man would die in a few years, after all. So Edward did not mind giving him some last favor. Edward hoped that he could find another way to start this series of events without letting Jon die, but he could not do so since he wanted to control the Vale, and Jon's existence would endanger his plans. Edward needed Jon's death to kill Lysa Arryn and Petyr Baelish. Plus, Jon Arryn was very old and weak at the moment. Although he could live for more years, would not let him pass away and not making him see more of this ugly world be merciful? Edward decided to give Jon some help here and asked someone to fetch some papers which contained some of the information about reading and writing materials that Edward ordered to teach in the new schools he built. Although it was not much, the calculation in this world was way very far behind. The small folks only used their hands to do their work. Plus, the reading and writing materials had many songs about Edward's kingdom, which would turn into an advertisement in the enemy's land. If all the merchants and small folks learned this, it would be enough to make their life a little easier and come to like the Kingdom of Storms. Don't comment on this part. I did not know how knowledgeable the small folks are. But since it was a medieval or like world, I assumed that most of them did not even know how to read and write. Back to Brienne. She managed to be the first female knight to enter Edward's Kingsguard after training with Edward for 4 years. Due to the girl's hard work and dedication, she managed to surpass Corinna. Edward knighted her at the young age of 16 himself after she had proved herself in a battle in Essos against the Dothraki hordes. Brienne did splendidly there that she got the admiration of everyone. Even Edward got impressed by her performance. The girl in her armor killed the well-known Cal Morro. This is an OC, so don't go and search for him, but if he was really one, then I killed it. Cap, who led a horde of 10,000 Dothraki riders to attack Cahir again too during that time. Brienne, who got sent with a group that would defend Cahir at that time, fought like there was no tomorrow, and she alone killed more than 200 Dothraki riders in that fight. In the end, she managed to find Morro and his blood riders. At that time, she only had 2 knights by her side, and they were facing the Cal with 3 blood riders and 3 other men. One of the knights beside her fell in that battle, but Brienne, who was brave enough to face the rest herself, managed to kill 2 blood riders in the Cal and snatched the victory too. Edward had instructed his men to annihilate any Dothraki horde that attack any of the cities. That was why after that battle, more than 30,000 men, women, and slaves' blood flooded the rivers and forest of Cahir. The new kingdom was the most frightening thing that the Dothraki had at the moment. No Cal dared to set his horde in the lands under the control of the kingdom. Edward knew that the Dothraki, without their horses, were only a bunch of sheep that they could kill without any problem. That was why Edward ordered to make traps around the cities to cut down the horses' legs before any battle. After that, any battle would become easy. After Brienne returned after her time in Essos, Edward gathered everyone to announce her as the second female knight in the kingdom. After another 2 years, Brienne managed to defeat Matteo Arc, the son of Edward's old friend, William Arc. Although the number of the Kingsguard was 7 in all the kingdoms, Edward disagreed with that. He had already 11 by the time Brienne joined the group. Edward did not see any reason to limit the number to 7 like that. Anyone worthy would have a chance to join. The only condition that Edward had set was to defeat one of the knights of the Kingsguard. Plus, Edward did not hold those men by his until they died like the Iron Throne. Edward saw that he should let them form their own families and enjoy life after 10 to 15 years of service. The other female knight got hit in the face time after time by Brienne. Not only did Brienne become a knight at the young age of 16, which was 3 years younger than Corinna when she became a knight, but Brienne managed to join the Kingsguard before her as well and did what she could not do all that time. Edward did not say anything to her and decided to monitor how Corinna would react. Edward did not need the weak will to be by his side, so if Corinna acted in a way that disappointed him, Edward would not mind losing someone as talented as her. Fortunately for Edward and every female, Corinna, who was feeling down and the look in her eyes was lifeless, managed to pass this hardship. She did not give up on her dream, but she put another huge one in front of her eyes. She defined another goal for herself and took Brienne as her target. She decided to join the King's Guard after defeating Brienne. That took us back to Edward and the group in Winterfell. After everyone heard Brienne's voice, the shock started to show on everyone's face. They had heard rumors about female knights in the Kingdom of Storms, but they had never seen one in their lives. Although Ned had seen Corinna when she was going through her training under Clyn back then when he visited Edward in Storm's Eye, he still could not believe that a female managed to join Edward's King's Guard. Did not that mean that she could defeat him as well? Ned could not take this thought from his mind for a long time. Every time he would see Brienne in the future, this image would surface and cause him to lose his face. Chapter 150, Arya and Brienne. So if the collected Eddard Stark behaved like that, what did you think the rest should act after hearing this news? Everyone was looking at Brienne with weird eyes this time. They did not expect to meet a female knight in Winterfell this time. It sure was a fascinating and eerie experience at the same time. Before Edward could respond to Brienne's question, a little brat came into the picture very fast. It seemed she ignored everyone else around her and only saw Brienne with eyes shaped like stars. She did not wait for anyone to tell her to get back and approached a female knight, not caring about anything in the world. Yet, ladies and gentlemen, meet and welcome the one and only Arya Stark. Too, you are a knight, right? Asked the little girl with stars in her eyes. She finally met someone who represented her dreams. She was a no-lady material, so she preferred to do what she liked. That meant that she preferred holding the sword and using the bow instead. She wanted to have the ability to fight and ride a horse. If she could become a knight, that would be even better. But she knew there were no female knights in Westeros, or that was what she thought till this moment. After seeing Brienne, Arya finally found a reason to continue on her path. As for Catelyn, who saw this scene, she had a change in expression at once. She was going nuts because of this daughter, who was more like Lyanna than her own mother. She did not want her daughter to act like this in front of the most important people in Westeros. What if she could not find a husband because of that? No one would want to marry some girl who did not have any ladylike features. Arya, get back here at once, young lady, said Catelyn in an angry tone. She did not want Arya to complicate things here. She already had to worry about what Edward wanted from Jon and did have time to take care of Arya's behavior at the moment. Edward always wondered if this woman liked anyone besides Sansa and her sons. Although he knew how Catelyn loved her children, she put too much pressure on the young Arya from a young age. No wonder that Arya was much closer to Jon than her other brothers. As for how Catelyn treated Jon, Edward did not have to talk or think about something like that. The woman was vengeful, and Edward's opinion of her continued to go down and down as the days passed. Arya, who heard her mother threatening words, did not even care about them at all. Although she was afraid of angering her mother, her dream had finally come true, and she would not miss this chance to ask the woman standing in front of her about that. Brienne, who saw the shining eyes the girl was looking at her with, wanted to answer the girl's question since she saw her young self in this little girl. Although this little girl did not seem to suffer the same way she did in her childhood, it seemed that she got confined and did not follow her passion. But Brienne was a knight serving in the King's Guard at the moment. She could not behave out of the line in her first time out with a king. So she looked at Edward to take his permission first before she gave the little girl any reply. She thought that was the right thing to do. Edward, who knew what Brienne wanted to do by looking at him like that, did not want to disappoint the lady and could only give her a nod. He was waiting for this, as well, since he wanted to make the little girl wish to come to his kingdom by herself. And the best way to do so was by accepting the marriage between her and his son. Although the two little brats were friends and Edward was 80% sure that Arya would not say a word if Ned agreed, Edward wanted her to come willingly. Brienne seemed a little overjoyed after seeing Edward nodded his head, indicating that she did not have to follow him and should answer the little girl instead. Edward sensed that Brienne wanted to describe how it was like to serve as a knight to the young girl, and she wanted to take her time doing something like that. Edward could only shake his head and take Jon and Ned with him to the crypt, leaving the others outside. "Yes, my lady. I am a knight serving as King Edward's King's Guard," said Brienne with a proud tone while she was still wearing her helmet. Brienne was very serious about her job and did not like to mess around with anyone. She took pride in Edward's service since he was the only one who believed in her. This journey to the north was Brienne's first time to accompany Edward outside the kingdom as a member of his King's Guard. She got appointed as one of the King's Guard not long ago before Edward decided to visit the north. How did you become a knight? Do you know how to use that sword? Asked Arya as she got overjoyed at the moment while pointing at the sword Brienne was using. She found her answer at the hands of that woman. She stood in front of a female knight here in Winterfell. Arya. Stop that right now, said Catelyn as she came close to pull Arya back. She did not want Arya to continue with this nonsense. The one standing in front of Arya was a respectful knight, and Arya was disrespecting her at the moment. I apologize for my daughter's improper behavior, said Catelyn as she apologized to Brienne after placing her daughter behind her back. She had had enough with Arya for that day. But I still want to ask her about everything, cried Arya as she did not want to miss this chance because of her annoying mother. The female knight was about to answer her question before her mother pulled her like that. There is nothing for all that, my lady. I already received the king's permission to answer the little girl's questions, said Brienne as she looked at Lady Stark with a little annoyed expression. Lady Stark reminded her about how those ladies in the kingdom, who looked at her as if she was inferior to them, treated her back then. But look at them now. They could not even raise their heads in front of her when she passed them. Although they would continue their talk about her in secret behind her back when she was absent, they would tremble in fear when they saw her again too. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.